That's an exciting one.
Can they hear me?
They have an offer that's open to
I don't know.
so it's basically
Good evening. Welcome to this special joint meeting of the City of Lake Forest Park and Recreation Board and the City's Historic Preservation Commission. The topic of tonight's meeting is Forest Park. No other agenda items will be heard. The purpose of the meeting is to hear a presentation from the Forest Park Project Board, an update on the work the board and its subcommittees have accomplished over the past year, and a presentation of the findings to date. Importantly, no final report or master plan is being presented this evening, and no action is requested from the board or commission. Comments, ideas, concerns, and direction are welcome from board and commission members and from members of the public.
As always, the commission and the board are here tonight to work together with all of you, the Forest Park Project Board, residents, neighbors, and other interested parties to continue the tradition that was established many years ago in this community. That tradition is a review process that allows community members to work together to preserve the qualities and unique character that make Lake Forest a special community. City of Lake Forest is committed to conducting open and democratic meetings. To achieve that goal, after presentation by the Forest Park Project Board and the initial board and commission comments, we will invite the public comment. A copy of the agenda is available in the back of the room, and there's also sign-up sheets available in the backup room if you're interested in being included on future mailings and information on this process. At this time, I'll ask the members of the commission and the board to introduce themselves, and then the staff will provide some background information. Why don't we start over on this end and work across and then go down to the smaller table.
Mary Ellen Swenson.
Guy Berg.
Susan Atkinson.
Fred Moyer.
Kurt Parrots.
Robin Ford.
Kurt Volkman.
Bob Taylor.
Michelle Green.
Dan Marinick.
Scott Shaking. Bill Ransom. Jim Preschleis.
All right, thank you, folks, and we can start our presentation. Oh, I'm sorry, Kathy, I think we have some staff comments, correct? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mary Van Arsdale, and I'd like to start with some staff background that we'll provide tonight. And the first thing is to share with you a process that we envision the Forest Park Project Board and this project moving forward through the community. And we'll pull this up here on the screen here quickly, I hope. Is it coming up? Sorry. But I'll just start, and you'll see it come up in just a second here. But really, the Forest Park project has been in this, for the past year, in what we call the research phase. And during this time, the Forest Park Project Board has been doing their investigation and analysis and preparation of reports that you're going to see tonight. The next step we envision is where we're moving into this community input process, which started really in May when they had their first meeting. And they did a presentation of their findings to date to a general meeting of the community. And they're moving into this evening where we're doing presentations of the joint board of the Park and Recreation Board and the Historic Preservation. And they're going to, during this phase of their of the public input, we're obviously looking for input tonight from the community as well. Then they will move into the plan development phase after we've done all of the gathering of feedback, and the Forest Park Project Board will review the feedback that they've heard from the community input, and they will come to hopefully some resolution and alignment of their subcommittee reports and develop a report and the master plan. And that would then need to come back through a public approval process, which is a next phase of when the public would be involved. And the public will have a chance to review their report, their master plan, and these will be public hearings before the HPC, the Park and Rec Board, and then we'll also have City Council consideration and recommendations. And that's when, at that point, there would be possibly action on their report and the master plan. After that, it would move into what we would envision a private funding aspect of the project, because as always been indicated since this project started almost 2 years ago, it would require funding from an outside source other than the city in order to implement the project. And the last thing, of course, is doing the implementation of this project at the park consistent with what the master plan that is approved and the community supports. So as you can see, we have multiple steps to go through yet for this project. We are in that community gathering phase still at this time, and all feedback this evening was much appreciated. Thank you.
All right, we can start with our presentation by our Forest Park Project Board and subcommittees, and we welcome Ralph.
I think we have one other comment for Kathy.
Just a few more background comments.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Thank
Sorry
you,
about that.
Chairman Ford, Chairman Peretz. I just wanted to cover two things. One, I wanted to talk just briefly about the master planning process and how it really is something that this community has utilized in many different ways. And second, I wanted to also speak briefly about the roles of the Historic Preservation Commission and the Park and Recreation Board. The process that Ms. Van Arsdale just described is not something that was created for this project. It is actually a process that we use over and over again in slightly different forms, but whether something is a small change to a single-family residential home or revitalization of the hospital campus. Just last week, the Plan Commission heard a presentation much the same as I expect you will hear tonight, and that was an informational presentation on revitalization of the Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital campus. They are at the very beginning of their planning process, and they came in also to present findings, to present history of the hospital. So I think it's important to know that this is a process that this community has used successfully. Master plans have been adopted for many institutions, many sites in Lake Forest, and a master plan is a guiding document. A master plan really allows all the findings, all the historical data to be boiled down to provide a final report that establishes some parameters of what can happen and what can't happen. The master plan, depending on how the Forest Park Project Board wants this plan to be presented, may be more detailed or it may be less detailed. But that plan will likely provide a very strong foundation that will guide all future decisions about the park. The plan also will likely speak to process. It may identify different components of the park that will need to go through different processes as funds are raised and as specific projects are put forward. So a master plan isn't a be-all, end-all. This is exactly where every brick or every light is going to be placed, but it really is an overarching document that will guide the city. And again, Lake Forest College, Lake Forest Academy, many of the churches in our community all use this approach. And with respect to roles, both the Historic Preservation Commission and Park and Recreation Board are recommending bodies to the City Council. Neither body will take final action on the master plan when it does come back to you, but both will be involved and you'll be looking at different aspects. And one of the reasons for this joint meeting today is it really seemed like a good opportunity, number one, to just, from staff perspective, to hear all this once and not spend 2 nights hearing it, but also to give you a chance to talk to each other and hear the perspectives of your colleagues on the opposite board or commission. The Historic Preservation Commission has some regulatory approvals that will need to be granted depending on what is proposed. The Park and Rec Board is responsible for looking at operation and programming and functioning. So obviously there needs to be overlap and communication. So with that, that concludes my comments, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, now we're ready for Ralph Gesualdo, Chairman of the Forest Park Project Board, to present.
Thank you. Thank you, boards. And I'd like to start out by thanking you for the effort that you give toward Lake Forest. It being a previous member of one of the boards, I understand the work that you have to put in to be on that board, so thank you for that. Good evening, and thank you for inviting us tonight. I'm Ralph Gesualdo, President of the Forest Park Project Board. Today, Forest Park remains the only park in Lake Forest without a master plan. In order to address this deficiency, our community has engaged in an important discussion about the future of Forest Park for more than 2 years now. That's why the City of Lake Forest created the Forest Park Project Board, so we can study all aspects of the rehabilitation plan, solicit and incorporate public comment, and eventually create sensible recommendations that meet our community's shared goals for this special public place. Our mission means we must be proactive and look at the park comprehensively on behalf of the needs and desires of the entire community, not just a vocal minority. Our board recognizes the complexity of the project that includes finding the right balance of rehabilitating, preserving, and enhancing the park for the recreation needs for this community for the next 100 years and beyond. Tonight, we will review the goals of the Forest Park project and our process for developing a plan. In addition, we will present the interim reports from 3 of our standing committees: Historic Preservation, Landscape and Horticulture, and Engineering. Each of these committees has spent countless hours of volunteer time researching their subject matters and preparing their findings. Not every interim report looks the same, and that's because we have encouraged each committee to follow its own methods and prepare its own analysis, and in a lot of cases, they differ in their findings. However, it is important to remember that all interim reports are just that, a first step in the process. As you will learn, the findings of these reports are in conflict over certain issues, once again, and that's important because there are many opinions about this project. It is our job as a board to review all sides of every issue so we can make a well-considered and fully informed decision about the future direction of this project. Contrary to recent rumors, no decisions, and I'm glad that Robin, chairperson, you brought that up today. There have been no decisions made by our board or any board, by our committee. They haven't been made about any aspect of a final plan. In fact, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to present the information we have gathered to date and solicit opinions. We look forward to your comments and questions and know that your input will be invaluable to our efforts in designing and proposing a workable plan for Forest Park and the future of Forest Park. We've prepared, I wanted to tell you who we are. We put together an executive board based on recommendations from the city that has a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, legal advisement by 2 people. We also went out and found a number of experts in certain fields that we thought brought value to being chair people of the committees: Michael Evner, Historic Preservation; Engineering and Technical, Tom Swarthout and Steve Douglas; Landscape and Horticulture, Cliff Miller; and Amenities Memorials, Judy Bogus. You will be hearing from 3 of these committees tonight on some of their findings. And what you're going to find is that they have spent a lot of time in putting together the information that they're going to present to you tonight. This project goes back over 2 years. And I think we're going to show you a historical chart that'll show you that since 2009, this is probably the 13th meeting that we've been in front of a group of Lake Forest residents, either in front of HPC, the Park and Rec Board, City Council, or visioning sessions, and actually a public forum meeting that we had last May. So there have been a number of meetings, and we've reached out to the public in a number of ways to find out what this community really wants and desires, keeping in line with what the community has designated this park to be all along. But you can see from the chart, and we're not going to painstakingly tell you. One of the committee members came up to me tonight before the meeting and said, "Are you going to take us through 150 pages of this report?" We promise not to do that. We promise not to be expeditious in your time, and I think you'll find that our reports to be concise. I think you'll find them to give you information, but we have provided you with some pretty heavy reading material that I would recommend as this process goes on. You do take the time to review it. I think you'll be impressed with the effort and the tenacity of the people on this board. Back in May, we had a public forum meeting held at Gordon Community Center with over 100 residents in attendance. And it was from that meeting that we felt, before we took any steps and we kept on this fact-finding mission, that we needed to get in front of these 2 boards to help get you informed on what we've done, what our process has been, and also to solicit your comments on the process at this point in time. What I'd like to do now is introduce an outstanding member of our Historic Preservation Committee. Gail Hodges has done a tremendous amount of work along with Michael Evner and the other people on this committee. This committee has probably put in a tremendous amount of time in researching the park, and I think you'll find Gail, who's going to do the report tonight, I think you'll find it very informative. Gail?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to both of these boards and to let you know a little bit about what we've been doing. Our committee started work last September, and after 6 months, we did produce a final interim report, which was unanimously approved by our committee and also by the Forest Park Board. There's a lot to know about Forest Park. It is indeed more than just one of our parks. It's more than just our oldest park. It is, in fact, a cultural landscape as defined by the U.S. Secretary of the Interior. This is for several reasons. It exemplifies the work of two distinguished 19th century landscape architects, Elmer and Hotchkiss and O.C. Simons. You can see some examples of their work on the left and right. You'll notice as I go through this that we have no photograph of Elmer and Hotchkiss. Unbelievably, although he spent his entire life almost in St. Louis, no one there, including a 100-year-old relative, had any photograph of him. So we will just have to imagine what he looked like. These are some examples of cultural landscapes of Hotchkiss and Simons. Hotchkiss on the left, some of his work in the cemeteries. Simons on the right, you'll recognize the tower at Fort Sheridan and Graceland Cemetery. And in the center, see if I can make this work right up here, is our own Lake Forest Cemetery, which was originally designated as a site in the Hotchkiss plan and then refined later by O.C. Simons. A number of the properties by each of these individuals are listed on the National Register. These are just a couple. The Chippewa Cemetery in Rock Island is one of Hotchkiss's work. Riverview Park in Hannibal, Missouri is one of Simons' work. Forest Park is also a cultural landscape because it's one of the earliest public parks in the United States. You may know that Central Park, 1857, from Olmsted and Vaux, was our first public park. That's an overview of it. It would have been known to the founders of Lake Forest, who did travel widely and were educated. There were also parks being developed before 1896, the date of Forest Park, up and down the North Shore in some places. These are some examples from Chicago, Washington Park, Lincoln Park, a couple of examples there, and Jackson Park, which of course was the site of the Columbian Exposition, which would have been attended probably by many people who were living in Lake Forest at that time. The park is also a contributing property in the Lake Forest National Register District, and this qualifies it as a cultural landscape. This means it has national significance. The area in the pale gold there is the Lake Forest National Register District. It is our oldest and first National Register District, and encompasses just about the entire area that was the original plat of Lake Forest, the original plat drawn by Hotchkiss. I think there's something interesting to note about the park, and that is the founders of Lake Forest, working with Hotchkiss, could have chosen any site for a park. They chose a prime, very valuable site on the lake for this park. And as you'll see later as we get into the Hotchkiss plan, it was very significant in the drawing of the plan. Now, because it is a cultural landscape, Forest Park does have certain statutory requirements. We have to, of course, comply with the requirements for certificates of appropriateness that are part of our historic preservation ordinance. We should follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic cultural landscapes. And should there be any funding that finds its way from the federal government for any work in the park itself or in any area adjoining it that's within the National Register District, there would be a requirement for what's called Section 106 review, which is for appropriateness, and that is done by the state of Illinois. Our committee also considered the park in the context of Lake Forest's history of stewardship, which goes back for more than 150 years. We've been a responsible steward of our cultural assets with public-private partnerships, with public projects, and with private projects. Some examples are Market Square, City Hall, which actually some of you may remember might have been torn down in the 1980s, or it might have had a glass, very contemporary addition done by the renowned architects at Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. Instead, we went with David Woodhouse, a preservation architect. And the beach, of course, which celebrates its 25th anniversary next year, and most recently, Elloa Farm. We also looked at the park in the context of Lake Forest's consequential planning decisions. Those are enumerated in the report, but there have been more than 20 of them that have come to define what we know as Lake Forest today. 3 ordinances of the 1900s are particularly significant with relation to this park. In 1923, we had one of the first zoning ordinances in the United States that controlled what could happen near the park. We couldn't have a grocery store there or a factory or whatever, only homes. We had the first Plan Commission in Illinois in 1926. Again, that controls the kind of development and special use that can be done in the community in different areas. And in 1997, we enacted the strongest preservation ordinance in Illinois, which we still work with today. 2 of those consequential decisions out of the 20 relate to this park. In 1856, when Elmer Hotchkiss was hired as the city planner, he focused a town plan on the natural environment and created what is well known as a city in a park. 40 years later, O.C. Simons was hired as a planner for this park. It was the only park in Lake Forest at that point in time. He emphasized the natural environment, the use of local materials and native plants, and he defined a setting for passive enjoyment of nature. The park has been a passive park for over 150 years. In fact, in 1987, with the Beach Project, the case for support, which was sent to the community for the referendum, specifically specified that Forest Park, up here on the bluff, was to remain a passive park. Let's look a little bit at Hotchkiss. His design philosophy is very important because this runs through every project he worked on. Most were cemeteries. Ours was a town plan, a street plan which was defined by the topography, the hydrology, and the vegetative features of the site, our curving roadways, which are integrated into the profile of our natural terrain, scenic prospects, particularly along the lake, and the preservation to the greatest extent possible of the native landscape. These are all principles that we abide by today. This is the earliest printed plan of the park. And what's interesting here, this was used as a promotional piece for attracting students to the first Lake Forest Academy. But if I can make this work, you see where the park is. The roads all ultimately, one way or the other, lead to the bottom to the railroad station. And that was to get all the residences connected to what was their most important transportation vehicle. And only on the west side of the tracks was there commercial development to be allowed. And that is true today. The legacy of the Hotchkiss plan, this is an 1872 colored version. It has dictated Lake Forest standards for development for 150 years. Forest Park is a unique component of this. It's the only set aside for a public park in the plan. It was the only park until West Park was developed around the time of the development of Market Square in the early 1900s, and is our only lakefront park. Simons had a similar design philosophy, but he carried it one step forward to really engage individuals in enjoying the landscape. His was a naturalistic idiom, simple design, less is more. He used local materials and native plants. He had a great respect for the topography and natural scenery and vistas of a site. A site along water was one of his favorites, and if you look at examples of his parks, you can see that ours is not unique in that respect, but he really wanted to use those 10 acres and 3,200 feet along the lake to give the best possible enjoyment from a passive perspective. Simons believed, and this is very significant when we look at where the park is today, that somewhat restricted views increase the visual involvement with the landscape. When you look at the original plan, and this is a part of it at the north end, those open spaces that have a little interruption on the way to the lake, I'm sorry this isn't larger, but it's such a huge thing. They range from, at Lake Road, in the original plan, from 75 feet to 200 feet wide. But there are interruptions. This is the north end. The ring road is clearly defined, and in the south end also. There was also a strong visual relationship, which you probably could have noticed from the very first slide that I had, and I won't go back to that, with the open lawns of the properties along on the west side of Lake Road. And that's an important relationship to maintain in the future. One of the best finds that we had as we did our investigation was a 1911 survey done by James Anderson Company, and some of you know that they have surveyed almost every square inch of this community. We found from that the ring road was located exactly as Simon specified it. So we knew how it was built. We knew how it was paved with macadam. We knew that there were no streetlights in the park. Those did not go in until a 1930s streetlight project. We also knew that there were maple, cherry, and apple trees in the park because the field notes set up the coordinates from certain trees in the park. The North Beach access road was clearly shown and had a concrete curb, and the central path, which was on Simon's plan, also was a good part of that. Simon's plat leaves us with a legacy, and it's interesting to look at these two aerial views on the right. The one at the top is the earliest aerial view available. It's from 1939, and the bottom one is from around 2007. You can see some change in the landscape, but the general overall pattern of coverage, particularly in 1939, is very, very similar to the actual plan. And in recent investigations, there has been actually some documented proof of what was found in the park, at least in 1915. And we'll have more of that at some time in the future. The legacy of Simon's plat is that it sets a background for the interdependent elements that have to work together as we go forward with planning: the geographical context, the natural systems, and the historical evolution of the park, and how these architects work there. We're faced with a number of deteriorated or diminished components of both the 1957 plan, the 1896 Simon's plan, and also the 1964 Belvedere stairs, all of which remain in the park in one way or another. There are a number of deteriorated or diminished components. These are some examples of them. The ring road, of course, is a major one. The engineering committee will talk about that. The walking paths, the bluff ravines and ravine roads are very important. What remains of forest and understory is important, and how we restore it. What happens to the vistas? As I mentioned earlier, the visual relationship between the lawns of the park and the neighbors on the west side of Lake Road is particularly important, and how we treat the Belvedere and the stairs, which are significant in their own right, although they followed in 1964. We're getting into this project for several reasons. The park is facing challenges of age and use. We have a deteriorating landscape, trees in decline, a need for sustainable maintenance practices. We have a deteriorating infrastructure there, particularly the condition of the road, the paths, and particularly the drainage. The historic landscape plans have been compromised over time so that the view sheds are somewhat obscured, and there's been a significant loss of native plant material, particularly in some areas. And we have a kind of a hodgepodge of signage and amenities, which definitely can be improved to be compatible with community needs. Our committee recommends that we respect the past while being forward-looking, that we observe throughout the project nationally exemplary standards now and in the future in preservation, rehabilitation, stewardship, and enhancement. And we think it's important to create a sustainable model for the future of all our parks, and this offers us an opportunity to do that. Two factors are at work here when you go ahead with a project like this. There's preservation, which requires the respect and honoring of the work and philosophies of Hotchkiss and Simons. This is what the Secretary of the Interior requires and defines. There also is rehabilitation, which is a little bit different and recognizes the need to alter or add to a historic property while retaining the property's historic character. That's where we have the need for conscious decision-making about the park itself, about the bluffs and ravines, about the immediate neighborhood and the impact, how we're going to fulfill the needs of the community. In all of this, our committee believes it is very important to remember that no change is really routine in a historic cultural landscape. Curbs and gutters, sewer drains, roads, signage, it all may seem very minuscule and picayune as you go through and nitpicking. But if these elements over time erode the important historic character, in the end you're left with nothing that's worthwhile. And the historic character is what makes our community so of such high value. As Ralph mentioned, our goal going forward is to develop a master plan where we're going to ensure, from our committee's perspective, a cultural landscape preservation and ongoing maintenance that preserves, respecting the work done by the early architects, defines sustainable solutions for infrastructure and horticultural and environmental restoration, enhance the park to meet present and future community needs, and also cover signage and so on. Our next steps, as we see it, are the following, and I would like to elaborate on one of these before concluding. We want to continue to engage the community. There are great ideas that have come forward earlier, and we expect them to come forward in the future. We feel it's very important to comply with the guidelines for cultural landscapes and the historic preservation ordinance of the City of Lake Forest. This is going to require an even greater in-depth review of changes to the park that have affected its integrity and that will affect its future. For example, there probably is a need to take the plan section by section and do photographs to see what we've got now and what it was meant to be to begin with. There are questions, and you'll hear this in the landscape report. We know that Simons definitely did the plan. We're lucky to have a rare existing plan. Most of his plans were destroyed in a fire at Graceland Cemetery. We know that there was native plant material, trees, foliage, etc. there. When Simon set to work, his plan likely tells what he would have taken out in order to clear certain areas, and he also specifically suggests additional plans. What I would like to mention, relating again back to the Secretary of the Interior, there are certain requirements, and these are important, to identify, retain, and preserve historic materials and features, and also protect and maintain those, to repair them where necessary, to replace them if that is necessary, to design for the replacement of missing historic features. If, for example, the road was not there, we might do something. Consider alterations and additions for any new use and have them designed compatibly is very important. And review the need and comply with any special considerations such as accessibility, health and safety, environmental considerations, and sustainability. Going forward throughout this process, our committee hopes that we will all keep in mind that Forest Park is a unique cultural asset. It is unquestionably deserving of responsible stewardship now and in the future. Thank you.
Our chairs of our engineering and technical committee are not here tonight. Our co-chairs, Tom Swarthout and Steve Douglas. Our presentation tonight is going to be done by Peter Whitmer. Peter?
Thank you. Our committee was the engineering and technical report. Let's see, seems like our technical piece is a little bit. There we go. Okay. And we're fortunate to have Mike Black and Tom Swarthout, chair, and Mike Black, a civil engineer, and you see the other members there. So we had a pretty well-rounded group. And basically, we looked at the existing condition, starting with the road. And really, the road, we took some core samples, and actually the base is in pretty good shape. And it's really just in deterioration from use. And so our committee came up with the conclusion that we could actually just grind the top down and fix in some of the base in some of the areas. It's kind of rough, but we can basically keep the road in its same place. We felt strongly that we shouldn't widen it all, just because of the impact that it would have on various trees. Right there, you can see how the road is pretty close, but we couldn't really find much evidence of the road degrading because of the bluff erosion. It's really just that you can see here off the edge that it's starting to come apart. A couple areas. This is the Spring Road or Spring Lane piece where you can see here it's the base is somewhat given off on the edge. One of the things that we think it makes a lot of sense to do is take out this metal curving. It's basically steel curving that's held in, it was driven in probably sometime when it was repaved, probably not part of the original road base. But we think that that should be removed. It's dangerous, it's basically pulling up. And that we also ought to go back with some type of curving. We're thinking some sort of concrete curb that's actually flush so that it wouldn't hold up, but it would hold the edge. And I think that's something in review that we've looked to see how that might work from a visual standpoint, that it's not a regular sort of 6-inch B curb that you'd see. Actually, just replace that curb on Lake. You can see how that looks. We don't really think that that would be appropriate for this ring road. The next piece of the engineering that we looked at was a drainage. There are drainage structures along the east side of that road that basically picks up the water so it doesn't go down off the edge and then is distributed through the storm sewer system. Most of them need repair. So part of that curbing, we would look to replace those drainage and basically repair what's there. But the system is somewhat in place in terms of the storm sewer system. It's really the inlets and being able to pick up the water from the edge. The next piece is the Belvedere and the stairs. And again, it's pretty much original from the 1960s when it was installed. There's some spalling of concrete, but structurally it's pretty sound. So our thought is that we could repair it and replace it. We have to be very careful because if we sort of demolish it and start over, we might end up having to do things with the code that might not really be able to retain the historic nature of this piece. And so, we felt that it's pretty, this stair itself is somewhat of an exercise thing. It's probably one of the pieces of the park that gets used the most. I don't know what it is. It seems that I've counted those numbers of stairs at the top. They're the same at the bottom, but they're a lot longer at the top. And as you go up and down more and more, they become much more difficult. But I think that's part of the park, and that we feel strongly that it really ought to just be repaired and repaired and upgraded that way. You can see here's just another slide. You can see where the basically a rusting of the railing piece there. The tread. The ramp system, again, sort of the same thing. I think the structure is pretty good, and it really just needs to be maintained. There's parts of the section that need to be replaced, and it really just hadn't had much attention to it in the last probably 20 years since it's been installed. Again, I think it's a unique way to get to the bottom of the beach, a different vehicle. If we were to tear it all out, I think there would be standards that we would probably have to make this ramp twice as long as it is currently. So we really feel like we ought to really maintain it and just really repair it. The parking, we've evaluated this and we thought that really the 90-degree parking isn't ideal in terms of backing in and backing out. And we thought we might try to look at a solution that maybe doesn't have as many parking spaces, that we might add parking spaces to the south lot, and that we could just have parallel parking in some areas. And again, I think that's in a further detail of the master plan and a further detail of the plan that gets developed, is whether that parking is there in that location makes sense in terms of its how it interacts with the final plan. There's just some more than 90. That's the south lot. In the south lot, we'd really like to expand it slightly just so a bus can get in and turn around. It's just got some very challenging bus turn relationships. The other thing in terms of drop-offs, we really think it makes a lot of sense, especially now that the boat ramps being improved, that we have buses and offloading actually happen down at the boat ramp side so that they actually drive down to the bottom and drop off as opposed to having the kids go up at the top. So again, that takes all the kids down at the bottom and then I'll let some off so that they don't have to go through the stairs and all those things. And also it leaves traffic off in terms of the ring road itself. Just one other piece on the ring road that I wanted to mention was, we really see that as a really wide sidewalk. I mean, I'd say that most of the traffic on that road is pedestrian, and probably, as a guy who goes on it pretty much every day, in the morning you see, it's just amazing how many people walk up and down that road, and that the occasional car, it really doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of conflict between the car and a pedestrian in that space, and I don't think there's really a need or desire to add a sidewalk to the road. you know, because it really acts like a really wide sidewalk that has a car going by it once in a while. And I think historically that's the way it's worked, and I think our group feels that that's probably appropriate going forward in the future too. In terms of handicap accessibility, you know, our group looked at it and said, you know, really, this is probably one of the parks that's most accessible to our handicapped people because they can drive through it. And so that they can actually don't have to, people who are immobile and can't get out of your car have the ability to experience that park by the ring road itself. So that's another thing. I mean, you can park and get out of the car and do that, and we need to provide some handicap parking. But I think, you know, a lot of our parks, people physically just cannot walk through or, you know, get out and walk through that park, and they can actually experience that park 12 months out of the year. And I think, you know, in the winter it's just as spectacular as it is in the summer. So the last piece that we looked at was the bluff itself and the restoration project that's going underway, and really it's been pretty successful. I mean, we're pretty fortunate that there isn't a huge amount of water erosion on the bluff itself, and they've started this project where they've removed a lot of the invasive trees, or trees that have a lot of foliage to cover the light that gets down to the surface. And you can see the improvements now and sort of how the ground foliage is actually coming back up. And I think also not only doing that, fortunately, it opens up the views then to the lake itself. So that's pretty much our group and what we looked at, and look forward to coming up and helping with the master plan as we move the process forward.
And our last report, I promised tonight, is landscape and horticulture, and our chairperson, Cliff Miller.
Members of the board and the committee, my name's Cliff Miller, and it's an honor to be here and present to you today. I am a chairman of the landscape committee, evaluating the plans as presented from the Lake Forest Garden Club to the city of Lake Forest. Our comments are limited to the plan that was presented, but because of issues related to the level of development of the plan, we were sort of caught in a bind between presenting, it's not a final plan, it's a concept plan. So part of our presentation relates to ideas that might help in the further development, and some of our comments relate to where it is in the current development. So I would like to start out by finding my presentation. Well, I will point out at this point that, you know, the committee was assembled by ourselves to, you know, I felt it was important when I was asked to chair this group that we put a committee of members together who were experts in the field, who had an understanding of a variety of concepts that we were going to be involved with. I have on the board is Steve Bartram, who is the president of Lake Forest Open Lands for several years, and is very familiar with natural areas management, being involved with roughly 800 acres of land that is under management in Lake Forest from a private group as well. We have John Mariani. I think the Mariani name is pretty well known in this town. He is a landscape architect who also has quite a bit of experience with natural areas restoration. I have Craig Bergman on the committee, who is also very involved in landscape design and very well versed in the interrelationship of these various spaces. When we shift into the landscape, we shift into a three-dimensional dimension, you know, and it changes the way you look at things. A lot of what you see is on paper. Most of what we deal with is in the, you know, out in the field in a three-dimensional format. So last, I had Alice Goltra, ex-president of the Lake Forest Garden Club, who herself has a wonderful restored natural garden, and Julie Prieb, who is also a professional landscape designer. So that being the committee, I'm going a long way. Let's see, how does this go? This program, Great. Sorry about that. Technically challenged. I'm a plantsman. So you can see the names of the individuals involved. You know, great group of people, a lot of knowledge. I think you're hard pressed to put any group together in this town who has an understanding of not just natural areas, but landscape design, spatial relationships as they relate to landscapes. So it was a lot of fun working with these people, most of whom are residents. We had a bit of an issue. Again, the plan was not a complete plan. If I was to present this to the city council or to either of your boards to be constructed as part of a, say, a residence's remodeling, the plan would not be accepted as presented. It is a conceptual plan. It is hard for us to get into detailed, comprehensive interpretations and comments related to a conceptual plan. We felt that it was important to show people, since us as professional landscape architects go through this process all the time and are quite familiar about how to move through it. But we thought for the people who don't know that, it might be of interest to show the design process.
So the people at home can hear you. Can you please talk into the microphone?
I'm really striking out on this one. So this represents, if you look at it, now all of this is in the report that's on the website, and I think you have the packets, and it goes into quite a bit more detail with definitions, but I just wanted you to know that we felt it was important so that just about anybody could understand the process that we took that's so natural for us as it would be with anybody in their individual field, that it would be a good idea for us to lay it out so that we can see how all of these things come. We start with the goals. What is the intent of this whole project? It then enters the process where we look at stuff like the historic significance, design, environmental, people would be their usages, and we value those. What is the value of that? Is it strictly historic and we don't, you know, going to put much weight on how the people are going to use it? Is it a design style that is significant to the history or to the needs that we have for the redevelopment? Then we go into the limiting factors. Proposed usages, is it passive or is it active? Is the design history, as it is in this case, of great concern? Is the usage history and the natural history? This park represents basically a forest that has, by its very nature, was constructed in that point. Anyway, going through that, these comments all directly relate, for the most part, to the master plan that was presented from Stephen Simpson Associates to the city. Master plan circulation. Separate pedestrian from, we feel that it's very in the best interest of the park to separate pedestrians from vehicular traffic. I know we've had comments about, you know, there not being enough of this or enough of that to really warrant it, but I often see an interaction between the various systems, and I don't think any of us would argue that it's safer to have cars and people apart. This park, sidewalks and pathways, we would see that as a granular and curvilinear pattern in keeping with the naturalistic design that the park was originally carved out of the road. We're very much of the opinion that the road should stay, but it needs to be improved. Variety of ways to deal with that. We suggest some in the report. Parking, certainly remove the center parking, enhance parking as possible, but we're concerned in the redevelopment of the south lot, which is obviously big on a lot of these plans, that the southern remnant of the oak upland forest be preserved. Stairs and beach access, maintain the existing structures, but I think we should explore perhaps some better solutions to connect the tableland to the beach. Did it again. I'd say help, but it's obvious. Thank you. Master plan concept, the site concept. Restoration and redevelopment of the spatial relationship between vistas, groves, and open parkland while addressing the needs of the residents. This means that the vistas are in need of redevelopment. The vistas have grown up. Some of them no longer exist. New ones have been opened. The clearing of the park, the opening of those trees has created vistas that didn't exist and don't necessarily relate to the plan or a plan as much to the existing vegetation. groves are disappearing. There aren't too many left. The trees are mainly old and in need of management and redevelopment. The open parkland and how it relates to these spaces needs to be examined, and all of this needs to take in what the current needs of the residents are. Technical issues, drainage, paving, amenities, stabilization of bluff and ravines. We feel strongly that there are environmentally sound and cost-effective solutions, not which we have seen a lot so far in the master plan presented us today. Existing and proposed vegetation, further review of the current vegetative inventory and proposed plant lists to ensure compatibility with the site and goals. Again, as the committee charged with reviewing the plan as presented, I think it's important for us to be factual and have our information correct. As an example of this, in the plant inventories pointed out in the master plan as presented, in the list of trees found in the park, the 3 most common trees are not listed. So this is something that we need to do and need to have a review of these types of situations so that we can move forward with a more complete data from which to work. The vistas, Forest Park and Ring Road, have always been primarily about the unique view to the lake. And as such, maintaining that view through the use of vistas is paramount. Identify locations to develop or restore the vistas in conjunction with management techniques such as the vegetative restoration of the bluff to minimize maintenance and increase stabilization while maximizing views. It's hard to see in the background, but you could see sort of a wide open view down a bluff to the lake below with scattered trees. This is a restoration of a collapsed bluff done in Lake Bluff probably 20 years ago, and this is the vegetative restoration that was used in that instance to allow for a long-term, low-maintenance vista to remain. It's a good example for those of you who would like to see that. I highly recommend looking at the bluff work that's been done on up there. Well, we've been actively maintaining that for a couple of decades now. The mature woodland is the only remaining remnant of the woodland present on the tableland when the park was set aside by Hotchkiss. Protecting the lakefront forest should be a primary goal. Reconstruction of the native oak forest to maintain the continuity between the ravines, bluff, and tableland while maintaining and enhancing the current level of intimacy provided by the woodland should be given strong consideration. The current level of intimacy, by that I would direct you to the trail as it comes off on the old roadbed from the southern parking lot. I don't know if any of you have walked that, but as you walk into that curvilinear path, it's the only place in the park where all of a sudden you're alone. It's quiet. You don't see anything that you see in the rest of the park. For a park that's about views, there isn't many from there. That little bit of change, that little bit of difference adds a whole dimension to this park. And it's these spatial relationships that I referred to when I talked about earlier this interrelation of these spaces. The places where there are things versus the places where they aren't, the importance of negative space in this park. Negative space is extremely important in the design of a space like this. You know, there are groves of trees, where a grove of trees is the same as a forest of trees, only it's minus the surrounds. So it is the negative space that defines a grove, not necessarily the trees that are within it. It's the combination of the two. You don't have a grove without a negative space that surrounds it. One of the current problems we have in the park today is there's been years of plopping, years of we need a tree here and we need a tree there, with really no direction other than somebody who's donating the tree has a specific place they want it to go, or the forester at that time determines that that's the tree that would work there. But it's not done in a way that relates to all these overall larger picture items that a good, well thought out plan would provide. I would refer to, say, the College of Lake Forest, which has a tree planting plan that encompasses probably 500 trees to be planted across the entire campus and has been underway for almost 20 years now. That has all the trees that should be planted everywhere on that campus, and if you want to donate a tree, it's one of those and it goes there. If the staff wants to put in a tree, it's one of those and it goes there. It's a great model, and I think we should consider it here. Again, this is good design, this is good management, this is good long-term direction. The unique geography found at Forest Park is really the greatest asset in our mind. People go to Forest Park to look at the lake because it's a view of the lake you can't get elsewhere. It's a hard view to get to McCormick, and the cemetery is a little bit different in the view shed. So driving along that lake, whether it be elderly people or people who don't have a lot of time, it's a fabulous view. The park, again, has always been about that. But not only do you have that tableland view, you have these incredible ravines. The southern ravine is an extremely high-quality remnant of the original forest once common throughout. There are all kinds of plants at all different levels in that ravine that don't exist in quite a few of the ravines today. So it's an important asset. It's also the hidden jewel because nobody ever pays any attention to it. And yet it's there, we have access to it, and there are ways to integrate it into the design of the park as a whole. I think one of the problems we have with Forest Park is everybody thinks about it as the grass on the top, and actually there's a whole lot more than that. The bluff, the ravines, and the beach is part of Forest Park. Although at times people would say the tableland's part of the beach. Unlike the ravines, the bluff vegetation has evolved into a completely different form since the formation of the park. What is there now was not there then. In the South Ravine, what is there now was there then. So there's been a complete change in the vegetative dynamics directly related to the kind of plant communities that were there 100 years ago. These are issues that need to be looked at. How do we deal with that? What is the dynamics of these various communities, and what is our place in managing those? When so much of this property is in a natural condition or a manipulated natural condition, these are things we need to know. And both provide the connection and transition to the beach and lake below. Amenities, they're all over the place. I don't think I have to tell anybody who's been out there, you have different kinds of garbage cans, different kinds of benches, different kinds of lightings, different kinds of bike racks, different kinds of signage. We're really in need of a review of what's truly necessary, consolidating it, updating it, and developing a consistent aesthetic as to what we need out there. I think the signage at this point, while it gets the functional aspects of a sign across, it's detrimental to the aesthetics of the park as a whole. Maintenance and management. Good design defines and drives both. Development, the development of written plans for the maintenance and management of the natural communities and turf areas to be used as guidelines for now and into the future is paramount to the long-term development of this park. We think that's one of the biggest pieces that is missing right now. We also think this is one of the parts that could be a part of the plan as we move forward. I'm going to back up just a second here because I didn't talk about during this little trick of I do want to point out that currently the primary uses of the park as we understand them is by the recreation department. It's primarily as a staging area for the beach below. For a fair amount of the residents, it's a staging area for the beach below. People drop off, people park, and they go down to the beach. Buses drop off, they go down to the beach. A lot of bus traffic on the ring road. Every one of those is going down to the beach. So it's a staging area. It's also a passive recreation area. I think most of us, certainly I, who do get by that, as Peter said, I also go by there almost on a daily basis. And it's always dog walking, jogging, biking. Today I had somebody doing push-ups on the bench. I thought that was interesting. But it's primarily, those types of activities are by nearby residents. Rarely do I see more than a couple of cars. You can see here on the left, one car parked, but 5 people there. A couple of them are running up and down the stairs, and a couple others are biking. It also gives you an idea of the traffic there, the motorcyclists waiting for the bicyclists to cross. The viewing of the lake via vehicular access on the roadway is also one of the primary uses. There is not a lot of traffic on this road. I don't think anybody would argue the point that I certainly, when I go out there, I don't see a lot of cars. And I think that's important when we look at just how we should be dealing with this road in the future. Is all of this related to the road? How does that weigh towards its true use and to the long-term goals of the park? Historically, that road is very important. Good design drives both the maintenance and management, development and written plans for maintenance and management of the natural communities and turf areas to be used as guidelines. Historic notes. I think this is really interesting. I mean, you heard a great presentation by Gail, and the Historic Committee has done this wonderful research regarding this park. I should point out that there are several of those points that our committee does not necessarily agree with. We agree to disagree. One of the interesting things about this park is it was never designed. The park was set aside by Hotchkiss as a sort of a bookend for Lake Forest, the university, and the train stations. It was the lake bookend for that whole corridor. He designed the roads, he encompassed it, but there was no interior work done. So the park was first protected. After that, there was many other uses of that area. There was minor cutting in there. There was the harvesting of gravel from the road. You'll see in the Simons plan the existence and part of, I think, even Anderson's plat. There used to be a haul road that went down through the current north entrance and came up through the ravine and came around towards the end of the lake. Did not come up with the current South Beach access road. There were trails within that park from people using them. People like Farwells, who lived to the west, cut trees out there. Were given permission, and the city notes record them. So it was a park that was a remnant lake forest that was just a really good-looking forest, protected as part of the overall design Hotchkiss set aside. But the interior of the park was not designed. Simons came in, and the plat that Simons put together, illustrating the ring road, which was then built according to the layout of the ring road, although the southern end of the road was not built, or at least was never put into the macadam. The plan from 1911, the survey shows it as a dotted line rather than a solid. The road takes you to the bluff, goes along the bluff, and comes back out to the lake. Part of the road that was on the plan no longer exists. That was where they had slope issues, and it's now a hiking path from South Beach. But Simons was not involved with any of the interior landscape design that remains or has been documented in the park itself. All of the early photographs of that park in that time frame show none of the plants. Simons showed a variety of plants that line the road that were not present at the time of the building of the park. None of those plants have been documented as planted. There are plants that were planted that were not on the plan. So it's interesting to note that none of the plans shown on Simons, none of the plants on Simons' plan exist in the park or existed shortly thereafter the construction of the road. What is interesting as well is that plants that are not on the plans are shown in these photographs. So we're firmly of the belief that Simons laid out this road, and by no means do I diminish the historic value of that. I just think it's important for us to stay very clear in our interpretation of the true historic values of this. The fact that Hotchkiss set it aside is historically valuable. The fact that Simons laid out the road is historically valuable. But neither of them record that the park as a whole was designed by either of them. Anderson's firm designed the Belvedere. Again, this is something, if you read in our notes, I don't think I could ever build that today if I brought that to the HPC and said I wanted to put that down by the lake. But it's an interesting structure. It has great history, the story behind it, and how it controls your views to the lake, and all this stuff that I've learned from the historic discussions regarding that. The fact that it is the #1 most important exercise element at the beach. You know, we don't see needs to remove the road. We don't see needs to remove the Belvedere. We see needs to perhaps restore, to change, and to firm up how they react to our current needs, or how they interact, I should say, with the current needs that the residents has. Simons laid out that road because the residents wanted a view of the bluff. It was a functional road. It's a simple loop. Today we're looking at how to coordinate something like that, the functional aspects that are required with the design that is in keeping with the historical landscape, which, as we point out here, was created by removals, not additions. There is very little in that park today that was planted. The original bones, the photographs you see, all the historic data points to the park being created by the removal of plants. And the removal of plants started early on, before even Hotchkiss set it aside, when those lands were timbered by farmers to the west. And it was continued done by people such as Farwell, who in the minutes of earlier city council meetings was asked for permission to cut timber in that park and was granted that for add to revetments down at the lake below. I'm sure it had nothing to do with opening up that view line from this backyard. Anyway, the point is that park is unique because it is a forest that we picked at. We slowly nibbled at, and now it's been nibbled a little too far. Now, in all those negative spaces that were created, it has had all of these other things put in without really a set of plans, without really a set of rhythms and rhymes. The overall oak overstory that created the character of which our whole town is built has been diminished through this practice. It is time for us to go in and to redo that, to restore that. I don't think Simon's goals for that park, I don't think Jens Jensen's goals for that park had he been involved, I don't think Hotchkiss's plans for that park would vary much more than any of us are heading for right now in our sight of what that park should, or our minds of what that park should look like. But I do think it's important to accurately represent the history as it relates to the park proper. So the interior of the park, the layout and all that, in our opinion and from our research, was never designed per se. Forest Park is unique. It's a wonderful asset to our community. I think it's, you know, it's just a wonderful spot. I go there all the time. I love that park. I spend a lot of time there at night. I love the moon coming up over the lake. That's my deal. And I walk the ring road. I don't go on the grassland a whole much because I don't really need to. I got the ring road. I can park right there. I can get out and look at my car. Would I walk from the south beach? I mean the south parking lot? Sure. Do I? No. When I go to the south parking lot, I usually go down in the ravine to the south or the beach or up and around. So I use this park all the time. I live just a few blocks from here, and I find this, and by watching people over the last couple of years in their use of that park, it is passive. It is not used a whole lot. It is about view. The park was built because of the view. The park is used by many because of the view. But I would venture to say that exercise is where a whole lot of current residents gain satisfaction from their use of the park. So I appreciate the opportunity to present the findings. There are more in depth in the website and also in your packets. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail, Cliff, and Peter for your presentations. Hopefully, what you saw demonstrated here was a care and concern over the park. As I mentioned, we have some differences in our committee reports, which was evident between Historic and Landscape Committee. But the one commonality between all the reports and all the committee members is I think they have a care and concern and love for this treasured asset. So I think that is the bond that keeps us together and hopefully will forge us moving forward to coming up with a conclusion and recommendations that will go in front of both of these boards at some time in the future. I think we stand available now to attempt to answer your questions, but more importantly than answering your questions is to listen to your cares and concerns and comments over the projects.
Okay. At this time, we can open up the meeting to questions from the board and the commission. Who would like to go first?
Yes.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I just wondered if you could describe the scope of the master plan for us. It seems like there's a lot of pieces of this. I grew up a block away from the lake, and I remember the beach project, and it seems like the stairs were added in the 60s, and the park itself was part of the original plot. But I guess my first reaction is that I think the master plan should integrate the park, the bluff, and the access points in the beach in its vision. And I'm just wondering, I know there's subcommittees and there's a lot of work going on and people are busy, but just taking a big step back, does it really encompass all three of those things in terms of its vision and its intent?
You know, I think it doesn't necessarily take the beach into play other than access to the beach. But part of his original master plan does have care and concern for the elements in the park. It does talk about the bluff and the vistas along the bluff. But I would agree with you, as a committee, we have taken that master plan and we do have a high care and concern, not only for the access, but all those elements that you've talked about, probably with the exception of the beach areas and the beach element.
Because I'm just thinking as a resident, if I'm up at the beach and it's a staging area, and, you know, we're thinking about one-off, the ring road and the curbs, and it doesn't dovetail or it's not consistent with the construction and the plans that are down at the beach, you know, from an aesthetic perspective, it may take away from the experience. And I'm just wondering, it doesn't have to be the same and be consistent, of course, but I think from a design perspective, it just makes a lot of sense. I don't think we have to get into a lot of detail around the beach, but certainly consider it as we're thinking about the staging area and approach to it, because that's the entree and that's the main event. And that's the whole purpose of those areas, it seems to me.
I think we would agree, and I think we need to look into that. Thank you.
I have a general question for you, Kathy, or Mary. You know, we keep talking about how this park is passive, and that's how we're using it now, that's how we've used it in the past, but is there any kind of ordinance or any kind of, you know, legal documentation or whatever that will keep this park passive in the future? Or is that just something that the rec designates it in? Because I'm thinking, you know, 50 years in the future, what if we need another soccer field and we decide to put it on Forest Park? Is there, I mean, well, I'm just saying, you know, it can happen that you can suddenly designate something active as an active park. So just wondering if there's any kind of legal definition of this as a passive park.
I can't say that we have a legal definition. However, we have a document that is considered the comprehensive plan for the parks throughout the community, and we have them categorized as, you know, community park, neighborhood park, those are our two main parks, I guess, and we have some of the special, like the nature preserve areas. And in those, we do define what we anticipate the primary use for those, and we have all kinds of characteristics about the park, its acreage, its amenities there, that kind of thing. So we do review those on a regular basis and have, you know, always looked at that. And I will say that in all information, going back as far as I could see too, it's always been the desire of this community to have that as a passive park. And there hasn't been any discussion in the park board in recent times, even when we updated that plan, to look at doing anything different with the use of that park. But to put an ordinance in that that's the only thing it could ever be is somewhat limiting, you know, because you just don't know what the future might hold. But that's where the community of that time should weigh in, and I'm sure they'll go back and see the value of all this research and all the history that is there, because this community very much values that. So, so no, we don't have an ordinance, but we do have guiding documents that we use to, when we reevaluate this on an occasional basis, and has never changed from that definition. So.
Yeah, I guess that would be a concern of mine going forward in the future. Somehow we protect that passive use, because that seems to be a really big characteristic here of this park, and it's a really important part of it, that it was designed as a passive park, and I'd like to see that use protected in the future.
That is exactly what the master plan is about. The master plan, the purpose of the master plan will be to make it clear that a domed soccer stadium can't be built on this park in the future. The master plan, and we don't know what that master plan will look like, but it might identify specific areas of that park that should be wooded. It could have statements that speak directly to passive. So the master plan is that legal document that you are looking for. Okay. That will be a guiding document. Doesn't mean that a council 25 years in the future couldn't make a change and build that dome stadium there. A current city council cannot bind a future city council, but the master plan is the answer to what you're looking for.
Okay. We hope to also add in there the uses that we think are acceptable in the passive park, but we're traveling along the path that it's definitely a passive park.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can I just remind all the board and commission members, I know you're squeezed in there, but please use your microphone so anyone watching at home can hear you.
Is mine on? I think so. Okay.
Ralph, I got a question. Gail's presentation, which was fantastic, thank you for that. You've mentioned the designation of the park as a cultural landscape and the designation of it as a contributing property to the city's National Register District. And those, I guess by definition, imply a lot of statutory requirements on what we can and can't do with the park going forward. Cliff, on the other hand, made the argument that the historical significance may not be that strong, and I didn't quite hear him say it's not to be designated as a cultural landscape, but I just want a clarification. Do the committees completely agree on that point of its designation as a cultural landscape, or is that a point of disagreement at this stage?
I believe it's a point that we're going to discuss in our future meetings. We haven't, how we've acted is all of our committees have given presentation to our executive committee. You know, after we continue to get comments from the public and the boards and everything else, we'll go back as a group and we'll make decisions and we'll vote as a group on hopefully coming up with decisions on whether it's cultural landscape, not cultural landscape. But we're still in that fact-finding stage of the process, so I don't think I have a clear answer for that. I don't think we have defined as a group whether we believe it's, our executive committee hasn't made that decision yet.
So just a follow-up question, and thinking ahead, if it is designated as a cultural landscape and we're subject to these Department of Interior statutory requirements, is there another park in the city with that designation so we can anticipate what that might mean for operation of the park? Or is this truly would be the first time in the city that that's, Mary?
I think I would defer that to Mary.
We do not have that designation elsewhere in any of the park system. We have operated underneath the city's preservation ordinance and or the park comprehensive plans that we have had. So this would be a unique guidelines that we would be adopting and new structure that we would comply with.
Okay.
Gail, do you want to add something to that?
No, I would just say that.
Can you use the microphone?
Excuse me. I believe the unanimous agreement of our committee is that this would be the only park that is a cultural landscape because of the broad range of the requirements that it meets. The two distinguished architects being in the National Register District and being one of the oldest parks in the nation. The next oldest park, I believe, is West Park, and that does have a historic structure in it, but I guess there must be a master plan for that because it has been said that there's no master plan, that this is the only park that does not have its own master plan.
We have master plans, some of them are very old.
Right. So. Yeah. But I'm not an in-depth knowledgeable about all the parks, but my perspective is that the only other one that has anything historic in it is West Park.
So this is not a cultural landscape right now. We have to go through a process to become a cultural landscape, or do we decide that we call it a cultural landscape, or is there?
It meets the requirements of a cultural landscape under the Secretary of the Interior's definitions in 3 areas.
Okay, so then we would designate it.
Things that define a cultural landscape, and in our case, it's a very strong case because we have 3 criteria. It's a contributing structure in a National Register district. Sorry, it's a contributing structure in a National Register district. Important people have worked there, the 2 landscape architects, and it is one of the oldest parks, public parks in the nation. We also could expand it because the founders of Lake Forest were significant individuals in the development of the Chicago region. And so they were the people who hired the Hotchkiss, who set up the plan. And also we have one of the second oldest planned community in the nation, and this is part of it. So there really, you could say there are 5 criteria that are met. So that's really it. I mean, it's defined, but it's not a matter of choosing do we want it or not. It meets the definition. And that requires a certain kind of care going forward.
Okay.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Yes, rather you or Peter could answer. In the engineering report, it seems a little unclear. In one part, they talk about expanding the south lot for bus turnaround, and then at the same time, they recommend using the bottom of the upper south lot for bus turnaround, but then recommend using the lower south parking lot for bus drop-off. And I just have some concerns about the lower bus drop-off location, just because then you have all these kids going through the boat hoist area and the opening to the compound, which and so just some concerns about having the summer camp kids having to traverse the area of the 2 boat hoists and the compound opening.
You know, I think we really haven't got enough data from Parks and Rec to really understand what the boat traffic is during the conflict. You know, when the kids being dropped off, what is the amount of boats that are going? Because I can tell you, from my observations at least of the boat area, it's probably 90% of the time empty, and it's on the weekends that it's really used that much. So I think once we get that data and understand that, we really see if that's, you know, a significant problem or not. But certainly that would be under our consideration when we do that.
Thank you.
And just going over to the dropping off in the south lot and having these little tiny kids walking past, I mean, that's a huge drop where they're dropping off those, putting the boats in. There is no wall there. These kids are young. You know, there's 1 leader to maybe 6, 7 kids. They're running around. I mean, if someone turned with one of their bags and they're dropping into the water.
Yeah.
I mean,
They're dropping out of the dock.
they're dropping onto the dock. I mean, it is not safe for these little kids. I mean, we're not talking about 12, 13-year-olds. We're talking about 3, 4, 5-year-old kids going down there. I mean, it's just not a viable option for these little kids.
Yeah, I think the original master plan by Stephen Stimson was to have the drop-off in the south parking lot.
Right.
You know, one of the things that we're looking at as a consideration is possible drop-off down below, but your comments are needed, so.
You know, just going back to some other things that were in Stimson's plan that we haven't seen addressed, for example, enhancement of the South Woods with a path and a seat wall on the Lakeview seating area to enjoy the lake vistas, seating and path area at the north end of the park. Didn't see any of that in any of the presentations today. Has that been completely wiped out, or where is that?
The elements of the park fall under engineering and technical.
Okay.
But what they've done is, I think they've tackled the road element first, because that seemed to be the hottest issue that faced the community. So as they continue to have their meetings, and before we get to the point where we'll be back in front of both of these boards, I think we'll have more information on that as well.
Go ahead.
I have a question about the beach stairs. That building that used to, I think many years ago, I don't know, maybe it was restrooms. It's not used for anything, it's just kind of ugly.
The middle of the Belvedere.
Yes.
Right. So with that, you can't change that in the future? Is that part of, just curious what can be changed with the chairs?
You know, one of the elements
stairs
that we're looking at is the Belvedere stairs. One of the suggestions that came from one of the committees was to leave it in its present format with repairs. You know, we are going to tackle the Belvedere stairs as well as the wooden stairs and discuss those at this point in time. I do agree there is a portion of those stairs that are not being used for anything at this point in time. So that is a concern of ours, and it has come up in some of our conversations as well. But we will, our final presentation, once again, will address, you know, not only the tableland, the access, the drop-off, but those stairwells as well.
Great, thanks.
I understand this is the question component of the evening's deliberations, so I won't make any comments other than the one I feel compelled to make about the amazing effort that these committees have put together. I tell you, I was really impressed, and it says something about our community that we've got people here who will put so much of their time and expertise into something, as well as we actually have these resources in our town. I mean, this is spectacular stuff. To get this out of a paid consultant, it'd be like pulling teeth. From where we've gone in this process, from the first time it appeared before our commission, I think it's been 1.5 years or maybe more, I feel so much more informed with the information I received last week and that was presented tonight, that rather than look at this and react from meeting to meeting as if, oh my God, this is excruciating, or what are we going to do, or someone told me on my way in here that I'm on the hot seat tonight. I tell you, if we were to look at this from the beginning as if it would take this trajectory, I'd have to say this is a wonderful process, because there was a lot of compassion in the last meeting and a lot of upset people thinking that things were going to happen without their input or against their desires, and I think it's actually unfolding in a very unique way. I think in one respect, everyone involved, and maybe in this room, is going to have some facet that will have been represented. That being said, and being somewhat of a veteran of the subcommittee business of working with petitioners in order to improve petitions and so forth, I'd like to ask a question, and I know there have been so many meetings, maybe this is logistically impossible, but are there, and I guess I'd ask staff perhaps, or you, is there a representative from the design firm here tonight?
No, there's not.
Boy, what a lost opportunity to get some good input. And I know it's probably hard to be at all these, and it would probably cost some expense because the person would be coming in long distance, but if I was working on this as my project, I would consider the input to be so important that, I know we have video and we have written minutes, but this is really a wonderful opportunity. I wonder if there's some way that this could be, this input could be a little bit more a component of the process. I was wondering, and I'm talking way too much than I wanted to, darn it. Let me just ask staff, is there, are we going to just see this again now? It's going to be sent off to the designer, it's going to come back and we're supposed to go yes or no? Or is it, what's the mechanism for integrating all this tremendous input into the process, maybe in forms of mini reviews or some other type of a mechanism?
All of the comments tonight will be taken by the Forest Park Executive Project Team and considered. This group is really working to develop the master plan, working to resolve the differences among the committee reports, and to make some final recommendations. They may choose to bring in one or more design consultants. I would anticipate that, much like a subcommittee, over the next few months as they work to do this, we will be also meeting with them. I think they'll want to talk with our engineering staff, with our Park and Rec Department staff, with planning staff. So this is not going from tonight to preparing a final plan tomorrow afternoon. I think the subcommittee, or the executive committee, has a lot of work ahead of it.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask you, because maybe you can be on the hot seat. Well, did it occur, or was it asked of the designer that he could be present at some of these? What was the rationale for not having that?
We made a conscious decision not to have Stephen here, his firm. What we wanted to do, we're still in that fact-finding process. We want to find out what truly the residents want, what your committees want to see, and then we'll work with the designer to prepare another master plan or whatever changes need to take place.
So you want us to have more of the control at this point?
What we want to do is have the citizens of Lake Forest have more of the control. We
That's
want to hear
what I
what
meant.
they want, yes.
Right.
We really don't want, Stephen has a vision, but more importantly than Stephen's vision is the people in Lake Forest's vision for the park. So we made a conscious decision for him not to be here. Now, whether him or other designers will be at future meetings, that most likely will take place. But we're still in that fact-finding informational period where we wanted to hear your comments, wanted to hear the concerns. You mentioned that the process was heated at one point in time. That was a good part of the process. We learned from those people who spoke up, the Friends of Forest Park and the other groups that spoke out that were against some of the elements in the park and changes in the parks. That's a positive part of the process. And I'm amazed by three things in this process. And I would agree with your sentiments that the quality of individuals that we've had on this committee, to me, is amazing. That's the first thing I'm amazed at. The second thing I was amazed at is the effort that you saw, and I'm glad that you saw it, that they put forth in presenting, and investigating and in their findings. The third thing that really amazes me is how I got put in charge of this, because I'm not, to me, hopefully that I'm adding some value, but the quality of the individuals that are part of this project have really been amazing for me.
No, and actually, my commendations extend to you as well for your time. To believe me, I sincerely mean that.
Well, Guy, thanks for stating that. And actually, I was thinking along the same lines, not just for the people involved, but also for the public that's come out today. And I love it when we get a full audience of participants that are interested in what's going on, and hopefully we'll have some input for us too. I also want to remind the commissioners, we have a normal process where we do questions and we do public input and then we do deliberations. We're not really doing that tonight because we're not taking any action. So this is your opportunity for qualitative comments too, and I think it'd be important to put those on the table a little bit, even if they're knee-jerk reactions, because we can see the committee has some differences of opinion with respect to whether the sidewalk and the road are separated and things like that. And I think it's interesting, to collect those, and nobody will nobody will have, you won't have like everybody in one direction there, but sooner or later you have to make some decisions on that. So.
The comments portion is really important.
Yeah, so I wouldn't mind kicking that off a little bit. So I don't really have any questions, but I do have some qualitative comments for you. And there are just some things to keep in mind. I'm particularly intrigued by the notion of whether the interior was designed or not designed, and I can understand how you could take different kind of approaches to it. But in my thinking, we have this master plan already. It's kind of right here, and all we're doing is updating this master plan. And I think the beauty of the parcel of land is that they didn't have to plant every tree. They were all out there. We just had to figure out which ones to avoid with the shovels, and put the road in the right place. And for the most part, it designed itself almost. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but the character that evolved is what we really are aspiring to maintain. And so, and maybe not evolved is the right word, but was achieved at least at the beginning. And we know that there are some areas of this park that can be improved or restored, call it whatever you want. I think that the one thing that occurs to me is when I look at the plan and what the intention might have been from O.C. Simons, how you enter this park, how you come through the bend of the first turn on the far south side, and then the view unfolds along the lake. That's the character in my mind that we want to make sure we don't destroy or that we want to maintain. And one of the things that happens today, because of the position of the south lot and the way that the vehicle entry to the park lines up with, I don't know if that's, what street that is. Is that Spring Street? Spring. So you take a left turn on Spring, it's a straight, it's part of the city grid. You take another left turn and it's still part of the city grid. It's a straight shot, and the meandering doesn't start until you're, past the Belvedere entrance, really. It's like, it seems like there might be an opportunity to try to resolve the entrance to what it used to be without having it all the way at the south end. It's just a kind of a qualitative comment, rather than this straight. And I know it's right, it's lifted right off of his plan. That's where the street was supposed to be. It's on his plan. But I feel like that wasn't really the primary entrance, or maybe the way that the view was supposed to unfold. So it's just something to think about. The other thing is whether you have a sidewalk adjacent to the curb, macadam, or paving. That's like the whole heart and soul of this. How you resolve that. You need to be able to use this in the winter, but there's kind of this romantic notion of the macadam that'd be kind of nice, it'd be kind of cool to restore that. I'm not sure if that surface works well in the winter or not. And whether or not this is a kind of a small country lane kind of affair, 18 feet wide with trees very closely spaced to it, or something that has 12 feet and 6 feet and 6 feet, it starts to unfold as a different kind of vista as you drive down it. And so I think that you should really be cautious about how that changes the character of it. And maybe there's an opportunity to incorporate both. Maybe at the south end and the north end, there's an opportunity to split the sidewalk off somehow, and it doesn't, and it becomes a minor component of the plan as opposed to a major change to the ring road, which we've now established is probably the most historic part of this, right? So anyway, and then one other comment for me, and then I promise I'll go quiet for a while. The notion of curbing or non-curbing, I like getting rid of the steel curbing. It's hard to argue with, although it's very innocuous when it's maintained. The concrete curbing won't be quite so innocuous, even if it's flat. So maybe if you have to do something different with curbing, it should be stone or something natural. I don't know what it is, but I would be I'm cautious about concrete curbing of any nature, just because it seems to affect the character of the road, which is, I know that there will be a big discussion about what kind of trees to place where. You'll get to that. I'm confident you've got resources to resolve that. The road is, in my mind, that's like where all the action is on this. This is what you got to get right. So those are mine.
The road has been a topic in all the meetings
sure.
and all the committees, so I agree with you.
Other comments from anybody?
Well, I'll just make a comment about the ring road as kind of a starting point. I've been thinking consciously about it since our last meeting and sort of kept tabs on how many times I actually dart over there, and it's interesting. It's an opportunity to make a quick 5-minute drive-by, even in the midst of your daily schedule, if you can work it in. And I'm surprised at how many times I actually did that this summer. And I know there was a great deal of discussion about whether that should get vacated, and I'm pretty fairly convinced now that I think that it should remain vehicular. I was intrigued with the notion of it being converted to a pedestrian way, and as I think you alluded to or stated, Kurt, that how you integrate a pedestrian walkway along that and to allow some sitting areas is probably a real important design feature, how this gets how this would be incorporated. In fact, I know Cliff mentioned the advantages to providing pedestrian pathways, and I think actually you had a sketch in your committee's submittal report showing kind of a parallel world where there was a pedestrian path, some kind of a stone bench, and then the ring road, and maybe some kind of a means to separate that, at least psychologically. And I think that might be effective. I don't think that logistically there's room for that to extend continuously, because you just run out of flat tableland at some portions of the ring road. It's just too close to trees, etc. But maybe sporadically branching off would be interesting. And then how and what type of benching we implement there has been something that I haven't been able to quite get my head around, and I think I keep conjuring up these minimalist sort of appearing corporate slabs that we may have seen, and I guess that's probably something I need to get over. I mean, the abstract concept of it I think is interesting. We have wooden benches and metal and wood type benches there now, but to just maybe create longer benching might make it seem less like we've just got a whole bunch of benches, you know, there. That's, I think, key. Maybe there's more input that our committee could give us on a plan for that, too, as long as they're being so generous with suggestions. But I'm feeling very much that vehicular nature is something we don't want to, I think, fool with. And the edging, I don't think that putting concrete curbing is at all appropriate. In most of that area in East Lake Forest, I believe they maintain what they call the country estates feature, which is just no curbing at all. And that sort of road just sort of transitioning to, in some cases, a little bit of an unsightly gravel and then a lawn that gets a little better the further away it is. Some people take spectacular care at that transition point. And there's one in particular that I visit where the people, I don't know, they must spend hours doing it, but it's pretty awesome. But I think that might be an appropriate way to maintain that naturalistic feature, is to keep the curbing off, and also the mention of the bioswales, which is more of a current type of a means to address water runoff issues rather than just shoot it out. I think that might be a nice way to incorporate some natural features.
Well, I can give you another comment from what I've seen. I've fortunately or unfortunately, I'm just entering into this process right now. So I am extremely impressed by the amount of work that's gone into this and the thought, and just so much research. And it's really encouraging to see, you know, the amount of care that's gone into this. So from this perspective, from my perspective, I think was most compelling as a member of the HPC is just the historical significance of this park. And to me, that's what's really kind of drive the design of the redesign of the project, is really to try and preserve the historic nature of this park and what was the original features. I think it's really important to preserve that. So, of course you're going to preserve the road, the ring road. That was the original one. I was not privy to all the conversations before that, but since that's an important feature, I think you really do need to preserve that, and as much, and keep it as you know, as much to the original design as you can, because it is a jewel of the east side here, and we've got some significant architects, landscape architects, and you just can't argue with that documentation that Gail's committee provided. So for me, that's the priority in looking at the different design elements.
Just a quick comment. I think it's a tribute to the process that's been designed here, is that I can remember sitting on that side of the bench when it was talked about that the ring road was going to be eliminated. And it was through the outcry of residents in the city and the investigations that we've done and the findings that we've had, now here we are, you know, months later, talking about the curbing that would go along something that we talked about being eliminated. So I think the process does work, and I think it's working toward finding out what really is what the residents of Lake Forest want and would take in respect to the historical value of some of the components of the park.
You know, we keep talking about designs, but after listening to the committee today, I question how much design actually went into the park and how much of it was just naturally beautiful. A road was put in, at the time probably for a horse and buggy. And at what point do you just let nature go and make small modifications? Because the park's dynamic. I mean, it can't be static. So anything we do today, it's just going to keep changing and changing. The trees grow, things come in. I mean, obviously it needs some attention. But I don't know how much design actually went in the past. Even in the 60s, people want to put up a stair, they put it up. People want to plant, they plant. It just seems like an arbitrary. So, I mean, it would be nice to know, are we talking about a design that we're trying to go back to, or are we just talking about a beautiful plot of land that had a little bit of work done on it?
And the issues that you have are the issues that we struggle with some differences between the different committees that we have. And those are going to be some of the issues that I think are going to cause us some consternation, but we will get to a plan and an idea and make a decision along those lines. But
the counterpoint to that is that sure, we could let it evolve and it'll change, it'll change, it'll change. It might change into something we don't like, and we like what we have. So we want to somehow preserve that character. And I think what we're seeing is that takes a planning approach to do that, and so that's what they're doing. And I think that's real. That concept is job one to understand and to take advantage of. That, you know, there's a unique character to this park that we want to preserve. Okay, that's like first bullet. How do we do it? Well, we have a master plan to make sure that, you know, somebody doesn't just plant a bunch of different trees. You know, they respect the character of it and they understand the character of it, and they say, well, this is where the groves are, this is where the vistas are, these are the kinds of trees that are appropriate for this kind of park. We don't want to put in a bunch of new, whatever they are. And so that, you know, I think we're on the right track for that. And I love it when we get to the level of detail, you know, arguing about, in the HPC, we argue about the size of the windows. We know we're on the right track when we're arguing about the size of the windows, because that means the rest of it's kind of resolving itself. So that's a good thing. It's always, you know, part of the process. We'd love to get to that park. So, but yeah, I think that it's interesting to see how much resolution they still have to come to within their own committee.
Well, I don't have any disagreement with having a plan. It's just if we look at it historically until today, I was under the assumption that this was like a plan. Everything was planned. The trees were planted 100 and something years ago, and it was been planned all along. And I'm just surprised, because that's not what I'm getting out of it today. It's still beautiful. Obviously, we don't want to just have things helter-skelter, but it's based on what the community wants, as opposed to what, and it's based also on what it started out as, a grove with forested areas and vistas. But it's not necessarily something that we're going to go out with a chainsaw and start knocking stuff down just because this is what it looked like in 1870 or something.
Surely.
Because it's going to change.
yeah, I think it's important, you know, part of our goals and our mission statement, you know, includes rehabilitate, preserve, you know, but we want to do it for the next 100 years. We want to bring the park up to date. We want to correct what needs to be corrected. So preservation is surely part of our mission statement.
I think one of the fears that you might encounter is that with this much attention and good attention, that too much might be added to the park. Where will you sort of stop and say, okay, we're adding too much. We're putting in too much more infrastructure and benches and stuff. How will you stop yourself?
That's a great question. And that's why I think that the balance that we have in the committees with historical, and one of the committees that hasn't presented tonight, we think it's farther down the line, is amenities and memorials. One of the concerns that has come up in the past is that there seems to be a number of different types of benches and seating there. You know, some of them are on grass, some of them are on pavement, some of them are on gravel. You know, they're all different types. So I think one of the things we want to do is some of the changes that we make will be less. You know, it will be one design, it'll be one bench, it will be one memorial. You know, and that's still to be tackled by, you know, amenities and memorials. So, you know, we are challenged with the obstacle of, you know, sometimes less is more. And I think that's one of the things that we'll discuss as time goes on.
Thank you.
I'm anxious to give the public an opportunity. Is there any other substantive commissioner comments or questions? We can always field a few more after we do public comment if we think of them. But what do you think, Susie?
I think we should
open
Robin,
up. Sorry.
That's okay.
Susie.
Close enough.
It's late.
I think we should open it up to public comments and questions.
Are we going to be able to comment after that?
Yeah, I think we
Sure.
should take an
Okay.
opportunity to do that.
At this time, we'll open up to comments from the public. We ask that you come to the podium and state your name and your address and limit your comments to 5 minutes. And we do hope there's not a lot of overlap or redundancy in the comments from everybody, but we're here and we're looking forward to listening to what you may have to say. Sir?
Thank you. My name's John Drummond. I live at 410 Woodland here in Lake Forest. I wanted to bring this book here tonight. This book is just out published a couple months ago. It's by Barbara Geiger. She's a landscape historian. And she studied Simons and its contemporaries for over a decade. She teaches in the College of Architecture at IIT, Chicago Botanic Garden, and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She's a tremendous resource historically. She could help a great deal in helping on this project, and I would recommend that the city consider her as a possible consultant. She points out all the Simons history, and I wanted to tell a little bit of story. When I saw this book, I realized how important a piece of work it is, because to answer your question about how much of the plan was really a part of this park, I was curious about that question myself, and so I went to Quincy, Illinois, which has about 6 of O.C. Simons parks, and I drove through three of the parks. And when I drove through the parks, which they're road-centric, they have roads in them that are important features of the parks, and they're on the Mississippi River, so it has the high bluff, it has the same components as Forest Park, the high bluff, the roadway that approaches the edge of the bluff, the views across to the water, the narrow openings, the vistas, the tree plantings and so forth. So there are parks that you can go to that he did design, and you can see the relationship. This road, I respectfully disagree with some of the comments made about it wasn't really designed. You can see vestiges of that idea. The ideas are all there. They're very powerful. They're all in this book, and I recommend that every board member read this book because it is in itself a roadmap for the master plan for this park. You don't have to do it. You just have to understand the concepts, and if we can incorporate those concepts into our plan, we'll go a long way to resolving a lot of these disagreements. One last comment is this is a postcard that the fellows at the Frame Forum, I bought from them. This is from 1910. Gives you an idea of how involved the automobile was in Lake Forest in 1910 in its relationship to the train station. And you can imagine how people coming to Lake Forest, one of the highlights of visit to Lake Forest would be go to Forest Park and drive through the ring road, either for some romantic experience or for, you know, to come, that's the point, you could actually see a lake not being a private piece of property. And that's the treasure that we have today. This is a public view of the lake. You don't have to borrow, you don't have to ask someone if you can go there. It's not someone else's property, it's our property. So if anyone wants to take a look at that, you can see.
Sir, could you tell us the name of the book before you...
Oh, excuse me. It's called Low Key Genius, The Life and Work of Landscape Art Gardener O.C. Simons. They used the word gardener in those days because architects were viewed as people who built houses and buildings. Architects didn't want to share the term architecture with people who did gardening. But today, he actually created the term landscape architect. He's nationally renowned for that. So you want to look at that.
Thank you very much.
You can take a look. Pass it around.
Any other comments?
I'm Kathy Dorman. I live at 730 Highview Terrace. I also brought a book tonight. This one is Geology Underfoot in Illinois, Raymond Wigger's book. It's been around a long time. And I'd like to just follow up on something that Cliff said and go into a little bit more detail about the ravine. I'd like to suggest, first of all, that if there's a master plan for Forest Park, that it extend down to the Witch Hazel Seminary Ravine. We keep talking about the ring road and the grassy area, but as he pointed out, the grassy area gives us a vista. The woods give people privacy and solitude, and the ravine gives you mystery. And the ravine gives you a look into a very old past that has been here since glacial times. That ravine, contrary to what we were told earlier, is full of wildflower colonies that are older than the trees. They're hundreds of years old, and they're full of wildflowers. You can go to Gazebo News and search for Witch Hazel Ravine, and you can see a photo essay on those flowers. So the master plan needs to have all of this, what we call a bluff coast, which is our bluff, our lake, and our forests. And the ravines, they're all one unit, and the master plan needs to take that into account. It's a lovely experience to certainly walk along the beach, but then to go stare into that ravine. You don't have to necessarily go down there, you can, but that's part of the whole park experience. The second thing I'd like to point out, and this is a minor point, it's about lighting. I like to go down to the beach and look at the stars. Maybe Cliff says he goes there at night too. Well, I do too. But the lights are bad at the beach for stargazing. There's a lot of glare. You really can't see the stars. And what I hope you'll do when you plan lighting for the top, and I do encourage the standardization of lights and benches and containers, is get some dark sky friendly lights that provide safe light for people, that light where people need to walk, but that don't light the sky and that don't glare in people's eyes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jan Gibson, 59 East Franklin Place, Lake Forest. I'm also going to discuss a book. Sorry, so third time around. I was going to talk about Barbara Geiger's book that I think really you should read. The Lake Forest Bookstore has copies of it now, but also O.C. Simon's book, and it's called Landscape Gardening. You can find it on Amazon. It's a much older book, and even the preface in it is probably a 35-page preface. Is fabulous, but it also discusses. I mean, these books discuss Lake Forest, the whole aura of roads and landscaping and mystery views and things like that. So, recommend that. The second point I want to make is I'm sure there are a lot of people watching this tonight because it's of public interest, and probably there are people who really, this is a big surprise. You know, for some reason they haven't been reading the paper or whatever. We had, at our last meeting in May, we were able to have the public ask questions through the city's website, I believe. And this is more of a transparency issue. I had certain questions about the curbing because I was unclear about what they were going to do. I didn't really want to see curbs in that lovely park. And so I had questions, and actually the engineering committee responded, and somehow they had a database and everyone was able to see who was asking the question, who was responding, what the responses were, and so forth. But suddenly it just stopped, I think. I couldn't find it after a while, but I think because of the public's interest in this, maybe you should consider, or maybe with the city, opening up some kind of a dialogue because this hasn't been resolved yet, and I'm sure people have questions. I know Gail mentioned engaging the community with ideas and concerns. So this would include the TV audience as well, not just this one meeting. So I just a helpful comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Pauline Moore, 2000 Knollwood Road. Before I start my comments, I'd like to thank the chairman also and the three presenters because not just the work that it represented, but it was very informative and interesting and from my standpoint, very appreciated. But tonight, on my comments, I'm speaking for the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation. And the following is the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation's position paper regarding a master plan for Lake Forest, and I'm going to read it. It is the consensus of the Board of Directors of the Foundation that the Forest Park Project Board and its various committees are well qualified to implement a master plan with due consideration of the principles of historic preservation. We also rely on the fact that the Historic Preservation Commission review for certificates of appropriateness will be required prior to the presentation of any plans and materials to the City Council. Our concerns at this time are that deliberations and decisions of the Project Board and its focus committees are consistent with the Simons and Hotchkiss visions for the park, and that final decisions meet the criteria for certificates of approval by the Historic Preservation Commission. Therefore, we respectfully offer the following recommendations. 1, guidelines for cultural landscape. Forest Park is a contributing property in the National Register Historic District. It is also, in quotation marks, a cultural landscape as defined by the Secretary of Interior, and therefore has guidelines for the treatment of cultural landscapes, requiring a cultural landscape plan for each of the following subjects. 1, the Ring Road. Maintain the Ring Road as a one-lane carriage road with pervious surface and allow automobile circulation. Simon's plan designated a one-lane carriage road, likely with a pervious surface. Simon's designed Forest Park in accordance with his vision of a public park, and this is a quote from Simon's, a place to show natural scenery observed from different points of view. One will wish to stop at certain places where the views are especially good, and there seats should be provided. In going about, one will either walk upon paths or lawns or ride in wheeled vehicles upon drives. Secondly, to preclude the possibility of driving on the Ring Road to view the lake from the top of the bluff violates Simon's vision for the park. To remove the Ring Road is to demolish the park's most significant historic structure and would warrant disapproval of a certificate of appropriateness by the Historic Preservation Commission. Minimal parking, screened with shrubbery in the massing style of O.C. Simons, should be allowed in an area near the historic vistas to the lake and include spaces for those with mobility issues. Parallel parking along the east side of Ring Road should not be allowed. Forest Park was designed as a respite to enjoy nature, not as a service area for the beach, and should not become one. That's why I like the engineer's suggestion, or the engineering committee's suggestion, that drop-offs be bused down to the beach. And the next point, the vistas. Restore Simon's original vistas as documented in his plan and verified by historic aerial and other photographs. Consider the appropriateness of additional vistas, respectful of Simon's design principles, from the wooded area south of Simon's historic landscape. Auxiliary structures. Auxiliary structures to include, but not limited to, bluff stairs, seating, memorials, signage, lighting, bike racks, picnic tables, trash receptacles, birdhouses, and drinking fountains should be subordinate to the general landscape effects. And that quote is, the general landscape effects quote is, as Simons said, as Simons envisioned park structures to be. The existing street lights are historic structures and should remain in the park. The Belvedere stairs are also an historic element and should not be widened. Horticulture. Planting should conform in the central historic area in, do I have another minute?
Please go ahead.
Okay, and in the treatment of renovated areas to Simon's original design and vision for parks. Plant material should conform to Simon's plant list, avoiding species now known to be invasive. All horticultural elements should be reviewed by horticultural experts, such as those at the Chicago Botanic Garden and the Morton Arboretum, which, by the way, Simon's designed. The design development documents should include a maintenance plan and an implementation strategy as prescribed by the National Park Service. Finally, the Historic Preservation Commission review. The project board should seek the ongoing advice and approval of the HPC as it moves through the design development phase and the construction implementation phase. The Historic Preservation Commission should not be asked to approve a final plan as a case of first impression. We did bring a few copies of the white paper on the back of the room, but it's on our website, so if anyone listening would like to access that, they should go to our website, which is very easy, lfpf.org. The home page will come up. Scroll to the bottom, it's the last item, and if you click on it, it'll come up, you can print it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
My name is Sandy Ganon. I live at 650 Northmore Road.
I hope you have a book, Sam.
Same one. I couldn't agree more with the recommendations for the two previous books mentioned. It's worth a read, although you have a pile of papers, so you have several nights of bedtime reading. I think Forest Park has survived, I think I said a long time ago, more through benign neglect than any plan or care, but it has survived. And significant remnants of it are there, and we need to take good care of them. We are the stewards, whether we like it or not, and it really is an important site. The emphasis in the last quarter century, and it will be a quarter century next year, has been on the beach and the renovation, and that's fine. It's a wonderful site and well used, but we can't forget the other things that were here long before. When the Garden Club Stimson plan was first presented, it caused me to take a longer, harder look at that site and really see what was there, not just look at it passing by or driving through in the ring road. And my first instinct was that the design of this park is very good, both functionally and aesthetically. And it's worked successfully in all seasons for well over a century. And as long as the core attributes remain intact, there's no reason it shouldn't work the same way for the next century. And I didn't know anything about Simons. I had to do a lot of research, self-education. I think some of the masters and professors who used to wake me up in early morning classes might be pleasantly surprised that I could continue to self-educate after I was beyond their purview. But everything I learned reinforced my original perception that this really was a good design. And that's not always the case once you get into things, but it certainly was in this instance. The one thing I would urge all of you to do, if you haven't, and I suspect many of you haven't, that we're all pretty busy, take the time to read these three reports, particularly the Historic Preservation Report and the interim, and the, excuse me, not the interim, the appendix. That's very important, and I think it will make your life easier because it'll give you a firm basis to evaluate this site, all aspects of this issue, and clearly plan for the future, because that's what the concern is right now. And it's also going to put you in very good stead with other issues coming up in this community, dealing with historic preservation and cultural landscapes. Some of them have been broached to date, pushed aside. This is not the last time you're going to be dealing with things of this issue, and this is a good starting point. Often, you know, if the time is taken to fully understand the problem, the solutions become pretty readily apparent, and I think this may be the case with this issue. Take the time to really delve into it. Reading these reports, if you have the time, read some of these books. Barbara Geiger's is wonderful. Read Simon's book. I mean, that's the word from the person who started this. Always wondered if you can get that. The big elephant in the room is the ring road, what happens to that, and the proposed recessed stone seating on the bluff edge. Those are the two items that really started this furor when the plan was first presented. I hope you will clearly address that and make clear, unambiguous recommendations. I think that will take a lot of the steam out of this issue, and then we can sit down and say, okay, what actual design development do we do with drainage, tree planting, pedestrian paths, curbs, all that. That can all be worked out, but we need to deal with those two big issues first off, have a conclusion, and then get down to the business of really refining this park so it can continue to work. Let's see. I'll end with a quote from the back of Barbara Geiger's book. Finding Simons and his approach to landscape, Simons respected and enhanced the spirit of the place everywhere he designed by observing and working with the natural qualities of a site, avoiding formal and geometric shapes. That's a pretty good synopsis. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sandy. Perfect timing. Any other comments from the, I think in the blue shirt, you had your hand up first. I'll get to you next.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he's got trouble staying awake in class. But that's sort of like...
Good evening. My name is Rami Lopad, and I live at 410 East Woodland Road. In Lake Forest, everyone is interested in some aspect of Forest Park. Some pay attention to its springtime plants. Some like to know the stairs are free of snow that they can rub up and down. Some live across the street and might not like a tree planted right in their view. Some drive their convertibles and wish that that big puddle on Spring Lane didn't splash quite so high. But there are arguably only 3 residents, and I include city staff members among them, who have taken time to study up on all the projects occurring at Forest Park. And that would be Sandy and Neva Ganon, you just heard from Sandy, and me. We have taken part in the Forest Park master planning process since the beginning. We have monitored the plant restoration work on the bluff. We have tramped up and down ravines, and we have found spawning fish and broken stormwater pipes. We nearly jumped out of our skins when city engineers proposed filling in a ravine to straighten the road to the South Beach. We have researched the historic work of landscape designer O.C. Simons and the early 20th century parks movement. We have read masses of city council meeting minutes from the 19th century. And we've attended city council public works committee meetings to find out more about the resurfacing and recurbing of Lake Road. And right along, we've been attending meetings like this one too. In short, we know the good, the bad, and the ugly of Forest Park. Tonight I want to offer you a couple of ideas on what needs to be done, in my opinion, by the Forest Park Project Board in order to move this planning process ahead. First, I hope you'll reread the February 2010 memo that former Historic Park Preservation Commission Chair Don Cook wrote for the HPC, and he sent it to the Parks Board. He said, quote, "Forest Park is historically significant. The master site plan should respect the original park design and should support rehabilitation of the park, which is defined as preservation of those elements and features that are significant to its historic value, while allowing sensitive alterations or upgrades to address contemporary uses and needs," end quote. Mr. Cook wrote that memo when the concept drawings for Forest Park, he called it the master site plan, were new to everyone. They had only been released to the public 1 month earlier. Since that time, 1.5 years has passed. The community has had time to take a closer look at what was proposed back then. A nonprofit private group called the Forest Park Project Board was set up. It in turn created committees to review the concept plan more thoroughly and make recommendations for its refinement. We are fortunate to have so many volunteers working on behalf of our city. Tonight we heard from Gail Hodges, who presented the report of the Forest Project Board's Historic Preservation Committee. This committee is urging the Forest Park Project Board to revise the concept plan in a way that, quote, retains and enhances the landscape's historic character. The committee is also recommending that, quote, restored and new plantings be compatible with the historic 1896 O.C. Simons plan and his gardening philosophy. The committee also said, among many other things, that seating that conveys a contemporary appearance or alters significant environmental features should be discouraged. Most importantly, this committee recommended that the Forest Park Project Board needs to follow guidelines developed by the U.S. Secretary of the Interior as it develops a new or revised set of forest park concepts. This is called the Cultural Landscapes process. Tonight, Gail said something that I've never heard before, that the Forest Park Project Board unanimously approved the Historic Preservation Committee's report. There seems to be a little disagreement on whether that really happened, but I can tell you this. Your formal statement of concurrence with those findings will give the Forest Park Project Board and all of its volunteers the clear direction they need. If you can urge the use of the cultural landscapes process, many unresolved issues will fall in place. The Landscape Committee and the Amenities Committee will know the naturalistic landscape motif to be used. The ring road will be restored and improved with historically sensitive materials, and the location and width of vistas can be specified far more easily. Even plant lists will be decided with ease. New ideas, such as using an O.C. Simons style wooden bridge, perhaps, a pedestrian bridge across that great ravine that was about to be filled in, might be considered. This will not be a short process. There are still many, and I stress many, issues to be resolved. Parking options, bus routes, signage, draining, seating types and locations, the location of materials of pedestrian paths, even the selection of a design for stormwater sewer drains depends on whether we follow guidelines for National Register properties. To give you more detail into what remains to be resolved at Forest Park, which means I drilled down to compare the fine print on all those committee reports, I prepared a PowerPoint. I have copies of the CDs to give to staff and to the co-chairs here, and anyone that wants it by email, see me after the meeting. I hope it helps you understand each of the issues in the park. As you well know, the master planning process for Forest Park started because, as Ralph Gesualdo mentioned, the city staff didn't have a recipe book for Forest Park. The staff wanted direction, for example, on what style of sign to fabricate when it needed a new sign. It wanted to know if residents wanted an arboretum of exotic trees or whether they should be planted in formal lines or informal groves. They wanted to know whether to put wood chips or ground covers under the oaks. The list was and is almost endless. We've spent 2 years talking about the overall concept for just one area of Forest Park, but the city staff has not yet received any direction from us. But they haven't waited for our decisions. As you know, they like to expedite. For valid restoration purposes, they've cut down dozens of trees on the bluff outside the boundaries of this
do you
plan.
have much longer? It's been almost 6 minutes.
Well, I got 2 more pages.
Well, how about another 30 seconds or so, please?
Okay, if you could wrap it up, that would be great.
Well, fine. The city staffs have not been part of this master planning process, and they need to be. I hope you'll use your influence to have that happen. In fact, if we can learn from the city staff what their most pressing projects are in the park, perhaps we can expedite that part of the concept planning process or find ways to work together more effectively. To forge ahead, we will also require the services of a landscape designer or architect who can draw up options for vistas, for signage, for all the things the public seems to want to know for the park, but needs to see on paper, sometimes over and over and over again. I hope the Forest Park Project Board will find the means to hire such a landscape architect who is familiar with the cultural landscape guidelines. Last, more attention needs to be given to promoting public participation in this process. When questions are asked, someone with knowledgeable answers and time for listening should be available. The good news is that the past year has not been wasted. We've learned an incredible amount about this park. We will be able to go forward quickly. And as it's been said, it's a lovely jewel, perhaps the most historic on the North Shore. And with your help, it will be a stunning example of historic preservation.
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry
you for
to
the
cut
extra
short
time.
the meeting.
Thanks, Rami.
Please, next, come on up. If everyone really could try to do their best. No,
I don't know.
I know there's a lot of folks who want to express an opinion tonight, and I want to encourage that, but I do also want to acknowledge the hour, so if you could keep your comments within the time frame,
I'll be
really
very brief.
appreciate it. Thank you very much. Go
I
ahead.
don't want to cut into Jimmy's squash time.
Please introduce yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment on the sterling work that's been done by these committees. I know they've put a lot of time into this, and we should be all very, very grateful. I'd like to point out that we as a community are especially fortunate to have an academic with the credentials of Gail Hodges. Living here and willing to take on the awesome responsibility of contributing to the faithful restoration of Forest Park. I also know there are a myriad of local people who would be delighted to have the opportunity to contribute to this. For example, just recently, Rami Lopat sent me a copy of the most complete analysis of the vegetation that was here in 1915 and what should be here now if previous generations hadn't tinkered with it. This whole process has been most enlightening. I don't know how many, if any, people were aware of the historical significance of this park before we started this exercise. It took the combined resources of the Historical Preservation Advisory Committee and Mrs. Hodges to bring it all to our attention, and with their assistance and research, we may very well be able to recreate the magic that O.C. Simons had planned over 100 years ago. What a feather in the cap for the Lake Forest, for our Lake Foresters it will be to be able to point with pride at our lovely park and truthfully say that it is just now as it was. It does appear also that this may be achieved with a relatively small amount of money, but with a great deal of thought and research. On just another note, I'd like to beg for an indulgence. These reports are all very detailed, as I'm sure you noticed, and I find that it's rather difficult to absorb and quantify them in just a few moments. Could I request that we all be given another opportunity to comment publicly in, say, a couple of weeks? I think it's unwise to pass judgment hastily. And given the time and thought the various committees have put into them, they deserve, I think, the courtesy of some constructive and well-considered suggestions. And I want to thank you all for your time. I know this is not an easy thing, and you all have children, wives, husbands waiting at home, and probably madder at hell than I'm taking so much of your time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for speaking. In the white. Yes.
My name is Cynthia Lee. I live at 327 Granby Road. And not to beat a dead horse, I'll be quick, but I did prepare some comments about cultural landscapes. And I'm hoping, in an effort to put Forest Park in a context of national historic importance, I'd like to make the following comments. The Alliance for Historic Landscape Preservation has a website, which you might be interested in looking at. And their first discussion, when they comment about what is a historic landscape, is led by a quote by J.B. Jackson, a famous cultural geographer, and he says, "Landscape implies far more than high-style aesthetics. It is a document of the shared aspirations, ingenuity, memories, and culture of its builders." The AHLP defines cultural landscapes as those that represent the combined works of nature and of man and are illustrative of the evolution of human society and settlement over time under the influence of the physical constraints and/or opportunities presented by their natural environment and of successive social, economic, and cultural forces, both external and internal. Of the cultural landscape types defined by UNESCO at the World Heritage Convention and its operation guidelines, the first they list is that a cultural landscape is a clearly defined landscape designed and created intentionally by man and embraces garden and parkland landscapes constructed for aesthetic reasons. I think there's no question that we have that at Forest Park. Over time, to escape the filthy conditions of industrializing societies in the mid-1800s, people began taking day trips to cemeteries for fresh air, courting, picnicking, and other forms of passive recreation. To avoid a different type of graveyard overcrowding, social reformers sought ways to provide relief to city dwellers, and the public park was born. As you know, Central Park was the first in the U.S. Simultaneous with parks development was the Garden City movement, which created the first planned towns, which ultimately became what we know as suburbia. Modern city planning in the U.S. was begun by landscape architects, Olmsted and Vaux being key players. Riverside, Illinois, designed by Olmsted and Vaux, is popularly referred to as the first planned community in the Garden City movement style of curving, picturesque roads. However, Hotchkiss' street plan for Lake Forest predates this plan, and in research circles, it is actually considered the first planned community. Our plat and our town, including the park, is of great historic national importance. Hand in hand with the development of this community was the design of our cemetery and Forest Park by O.C. Simons. Specific to Forest Park and in support of Gail's presentation is the emphasizing of restricted views, passive activity. Another characteristic of Simons Park design is to place a road close to a vista when possible. He discusses this in his book, and we see this in Forest Park and in the park that John mentioned in Quincy, Illinois, which overlooks the Mississippi River. I urge the boards to avoid the temptation to equate Jensen and Simons. Simons is different in many distinct ways, which I will not go into. It would be highly unfortunate to put in a modernized version of Jensen's signature council rings by cutting stone seating into the bluffs and into the park, nearly half the park's width as proposed in the Stimson plan. Having rock seat walls would then push the road into the middle of the park if part of the road were relocated. It will be equally unfortunate to add sidewalks and make a pedestrian racetrack of sorts through the park. It would be easy enough to add a feature in the paving of the existing 2-lane road to delineate cars and people. Guy, you are the only person I know in the group who grew up here, and you will recall there was 2-way traffic way back on that road, cars going in both directions. Nobody got run over. Check the police reports. There are not accidents that have happened on that road. Many residents have invested countless hours of pertinent research and have more knowledge about this subject that could make it into the reports. I implore the board members to please contact these people and ask questions and have further discussions. There's much to honor and get excited about as we remain stewards of Forest Park, our historic district, and our community. I can only ask that as you move forward, you think in terms of Forest Park as this valid cultural landscape that it is. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And just Susie, myself, Michelle, and Bob Taylor all grew up here as well, and Jack. There's a number of us. Mr. Falcone?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Basil Falcone, and my wife and I live at 930 Lake Road. And this will be about 2 minutes, and it addresses what the board, those of you who are present, had some skepticism as it relates to statutes and ordinances, which I think are very important and central to moving this particular project forward. I don't just think, I think we can all applaud the spectacular work that's been done on this particular project. We very much, I commend the outstanding work that was done by Gail Hodges in her presentation. I have here 10 criteria from the Historic Preservation Ordinance, which qualifies this property, being the O.C. Simons property, for Lake Forest as a landmark designation. 10 criteria. I will pass this information on to all of you to review. I will say that 2 years ago, I provided the same criteria to members who were here, specifically Mary and Ralph, and I'm sure they've thought through this process. I think it'll alleviate a lot of the skepticism that you may all have as it relates to ordinances and statutes, as this relates to the historical preservation issues that you've addressed during this particular meeting and have been addressed for the last 2 years. So I'll be happy to pass this on, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, Neva.
Hi, I'm Neva Ganan. I live at 650 Northmore, and I feel like this is my postgraduate degree on O.C. Simons. When I started this in January 2010, I didn't realize when I was in grad school, I'd sat in his garden at Cranbrook because it wasn't mentioned. And you know, your point about, did this just happen, or is this actually planned? When it's planned well, you don't notice it. You don't notice Forest Park. You go there because you like it. I want to thank especially Ken Leone, who was formerly with the city, and Phil Alder, the sexton, who were the people who recognized and preserved the landscape document from 1896. Without their care, it would have been trashed. O.C. Simons' design still works at Forest Park after more than 100 years. Changes in personal design have not affected the impact of the park. O.C. recognized that there would be transportation changes, and that design still works for us. It needs a little straightening up, but the important point I want to make this evening is that the decisions that you make for Forest Park are going to set the precedent for the city and how it handles these types of issues for years to come, decades to come. We've got to keep that responsibility uppermost. I know that there are a lot of people who have put in a lot of hours. We've got to get it right. And there have been great suggestions tonight. Our imperative tonight is to work together to preserve, not change, Simon's legacy in Lake Forest. We're most fortunate to have Simon's plans for Forest Park as well as for the cemetery bookend the historic Lake Road district. This is a treasure. It's our obligation to create a cultural landscape plan which respects the national importance of these existing treasures that belong to the city. The plan we create will set a precedent which will be a touchstone for us as well as for future generations. Thank you, and thanks to everybody who's put in a ton of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Neva. Mrs. Falcone.
Good evening to both chairs, Ms. Ford, Mr. Parrots, and board members. Thank you for being here tonight. I know you're tired, but we've been on this for 2.5 years, and it's a lot longer than tonight. My name is Leone Falcone. I live at 930 Lake Road, and can you hear me? Yes. You can. The association Friends of Forest Park was formed shortly after the idea of changing Forest Park and was proposed at a meeting at the Rec Centre in mid-2009. We then sent this following letter to the Garden Club, which comprises approximately 2/3 of the Forest Park Commission and who initiated this project. And this is our letter to them. Dear Garden Club members, the Friends of Forest Park have been formed as an association with the aims and desires of our members to preserve the integrity and visual character of Forest Park. As you're all no doubt aware, the park is part of the Lake Forest Historic District and is protected under the Preservation Ordinance of 1998. While we're all thrilled that the Garden Club has taken an interest in the park, we would like to remind you that we do not think it would be in the spirit of the Preservation Ordinance to make any dramatic changes in the layout or concept that it presently enjoys. It's very much loved in its present state by the local residents. Since its wide open spaces have brought active enjoyment and use to so many people for so long, we hope that you will be most circumspect in urging any changes that might alter this historic area. Again, it is most kind of you to take an interest in Forest Park, and we do welcome any ideas that you might have for maintaining the area in first-class condition. In September of 2009, the Parks and Recs Department designed a feedback form for a proposed master plan, and we responded by gathering 100 signatures from people who would like to see little to no changes to the park. That letter was forwarded to both Mayor Cowie and Donald Cook, the then chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. On the 23rd of March 2010, the master plan was presented to the residents in City of Lake Forest by the Lake Forest Garden Club. We were concerned enough by the drastic changes to the park as presented by Mr. Stimpson from Massachusetts that we formed a petition that was captioned, "On Monday, the 19th of April 2010, the City of Lake Forest City Council will vote on a proposed plan which will forever ban cars from entering and driving along the bluff by closing the ring road through the forest park. The ring road is a central feature of the historic 1901 plan for the park, drawn up by an icon of landscape design, O.C. Simons. Forest Park is in the East Lake Forest Historic District." And below that it stated, "We, the undersigned, petition the City of Lake Forest City Council to keep the park open to cars." Well, people lined up to sign that petition at a rate of 50 per hour in some cases. They called, they drove to our house, they called others to do the same. I'm told that the last petition to obtain as many signatures concerned cluster housing over 25 years ago. so we've got a pretty good record. As one spouse would put a signature to paper, the other invited friends and passers-by to also put a signature to paper. Along with the 100 feedback signatures, over 1,300 people have signed to keep the park in its present state, with few to no changes to the park. We stand here before the Forest Park Commission, the Parks and Rec Department, with that same request, that you will be most circumspect in urging any changes that might alter this beautiful historic area, and that the Historic Preservation Commission be considerate of the citizens of Lake Forest in their recreational use and enjoyment of this magical park, Forest Park. And to those of you who have signed the petition, we thank you for your interest in this property. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Yes.
It's short. I'm David O'Neill, live at 139 Woodland Road, and I'm the product of two of the oldest families in Lake Forest. Been here a long time. Regarding the master plan that we've gotten from the Simpson Group through the Garden Club, I have another alternative for that. Give the project to the local contractor, landscapers, and their architects. The contractors who now work in the city that I have talked to have said, yes, a good idea. They will work together, work with you, come up with a plan. Even though the city, even though they are fierce competitors, they will come together for the sake of the park and our city. They are the people who have cared for, dug ditches, planted and watered this kind of property. Mr. Simpson deals in swamps and sandbags. Thank you. They know what the Lake Forest and O.C. Simon look should be. They have lived it. Most of these people have lived here and pay taxes in our community. Therefore, they should have at least a chance at their own land. Give them the chance to refurbish the park. Be sure to give them all the permeations for this project so we don't have to go through all of this again and again and again. 1, the O.C. Simon original plat. 2, the plant list from 1911, someone said. Historic preservation's input, Lake Forest Preservation input. One thing that hasn't been discussed is you should discuss also with the police for the input for the day and night and safety and protection of the park. Metal picket fence, I don't think. Low shrubs, yes or no? Are people going to hide in them or kids drink their beer and whatever in there? Whatever. A water feature. They removed the one out of Triangle Park because they thought kids were drowned in it. Never heard of anyone drowning in it. And the drainage concerns and the erosion in the ravines. To conclude, the ideas will make a beautiful, refreshed, I can't read, space of which we all can be proud. As to the Lake Forest Garden Club, who generously started this, you were given a project without the will of the people, which was wrong to do. And again, Garden Club, thank you for all that you've done for your town and city and Lake Forest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're...
Any other public comment? I think I'm going to close that unless we see anybody else. Thank you. Before we do closing comments there, we do want to give Ralph an opportunity just to give us some closing comments. I did offer to Guy that there would be a chance to give another comment if anyone wants to. Would you like to do that, Guy? Please.
Could I do it now?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, I'd like, actually, as a segue into my comment or two, I'd like to also I'd like to segue into it by setting to rest any concerns from the members of the public tonight that whether or not we've had the energy to stay up and read this report, and I can assure you that I've read it almost twice, and I'm sure the rest of my colleagues have done that as well. I actually read myself O.C. Simon's own book, Landscape Gardening, over 10 years ago, so I'm very interested in this just for my general knowledge, not to bone up. And as another segue into an important comment I'd like to make, I think at the top of Geiger's book, there's a small plan that I believe is taken from the blueprint plan we have in our packet that shows the ring road in Lake Forest. So actually it's in that book, and I think I can remember word for word. There's a line in there that said the road featured a ring road near the edge of the cliff so residents could ride out for views across the water. And I think that might be a really good thing to open up with, because I get the feeling that we keep on referring to O.C. Simon's original plan as if we want to go back. We don't want to deviate from it and change it. And I really think that the damage has actually been done and been going on for a long time. I think if we polled everyone in this room, everybody would have a different idea of what O.C. Simon's means by vistas and views. It's interesting that Cliff made mention of Lake Bluff. I was going to do that, and I thought, oh, I better not. It's not in our community. But just recently, I watched the orange moonrise there when I was coming back from Crabtree Farm, and it's spectacular. In Lake Bluff, on their short little road, that's a fraction of our lake road, you can really see the water, and you can enjoy the moon. And as a means of contemplative respite, it's spectacular. It beats the pants off of what we have. It almost is irritating to try to get a view out over our water right now. There are two view corridors, one at the very north part before you turn to leave, and another one located somewhere in the middle, and they're so short of view that you have to stop your car and go, oops, that's what I wanted to see, back up, and then sit there and look at it. And you almost feel like the views are being held back where they should be opened up. So I think rather than just decide we need to make a decision that this needs to have some kind of a cultural landscape designation so that the plan gets restored, Cliff brought up a really great point, is that it's not just this plan view we're looking at here, but it's three-dimensional. I think we ought to spend some time trying to think about what is a vista, how much of it we want to see, and use that as maybe our starting point. When I was out today looking at the park again, I also noticed that it just seems to be an awful lot of trees have been dropped into the plan or into the park. And when I look at the O.C. Simon's plan, I see some pretty open, as Cliff referred to them as negative spaces. It's, I think, a very good way to refer to them. But there really are kind of open lungs there. And we don't seem to have that right now. And I'm concerned that we're worried about changing something that's actually been just slowly eroding and losing its original beauty and aesthetic quality. The clumping together of trees so they form a group surrounded by open pasture, that's something that I recall from O.C. Simon's book that he wrote himself. And we kind of just, I think, plop and drops happened in Forest Park. I don't know that we have to add things to get to a better place. We might have to think about taking away things and seriously improve the park from an artistic standpoint. I think that's really key. Running off and saying we have to preserve O.C. Simon's, I think we need to kind of more define those physical and spatial characteristics. I mean, O.C. Simon's isn't here anymore to enjoy the park anyway. We are. So I think I'd just like to stop with that, but I'm afraid we might be giving direction that's going to get interpreted any old way if we send it off to New England. Chairman, that's all I had.
Thanks, Guy. I appreciate those remarks. And pardon me for interjecting a little agenda change here, but so I've asked for a few comments from the commissioners since we've asked them to sit here all night, and I don't want to discount anybody else if they have any wrap-up comments, but if anyone else has anything. Okay, then I think, Ralph, it's been interesting, I'm sure, for you to hear all these points of view, and Interestingly enough, I didn't see a lot of support for certain features of the plan, so I'm sure you listened to the same stuff I did. What's your thoughts?
My comments are thank you. I mean, this has been an educational process in moving toward, a final plan. My comments will be very brief out of respect of your time and respect of the hour of the night. So I think the first thing that's important to know is that we have a lot of work left to do. And it looks like we have a lot of reading to do as well. There's quite a few books out there that I think I'll be running off to the library to buy. But what I'd like to reserve the process is not to respond to the comments and questions tonight, but we do have a website, www.forestpark.com, that's been active for some time. And we will respond to the comments and the questions on the website for all those to see. And I think that's the best way to move forward. There was a lot of pointed comments, there was a lot of questions, but I think the best way of moving forward at this hour tonight is to get them on the website. But I will reiterate something that we mentioned earlier. We haven't made any decisions. We haven't voted on any committee reports. If there's been unanimous approval, it was by the committees themselves, but not by our executive board. We believe in the process. We believe that we need meetings like this. We need the public comments. I would encourage the public comments to continue, the public questions to continue, and the best place for that is on our website, www.forestpark.com. We will make an effort to answer those questions and listen to those comments and keep moving forward in a positive way, respectful to the heritage of the park and respectful to moving forward for the next 100 years.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for... Thanks, Rob.
Thanks,
Rob. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Do we have any other final announcements from the staff?
No.
That's good. We're okay with that. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I don't need a motion to adjourn, so we're going home. Good night.
Thank you.
When do you think we're going to see this plan?
I don't know.